course, a particularly warm welcome to our distinguished panelists and speakers during the day. We're gathered here at the newly renovated Beijersalen at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences in Stockholm. This is actually the very first meeting here. I hope this afternoon will be as rewarding for you as for us. We're really keen to get your input on how Ambio can continue to be a relevant research platform, but also how we can turn the scientific knowledge into much needed action. Let's see if I can change to the next slide, perhaps. Yes. This slide shows all of the current associate editors of Ambio, and you can read more about them at their Springer website at Journal Updates, Meet Editors. There will be short bios about them there. I came to Ambio in 2010. Before that, I was an editor of Biological Conservation. And it would have been a terrifying experience to come to Ambio without these very competent editors because of the very broad scope of Ambio with the environmental research and policy science. Yes. We have fared quite well during the last 10 years with ever increasing number of citations, submissions, and article downloads. And our focus has been to streamline all processes from submission to production so that the work of the reviewers and authors become easier. In next year, we will become an e-journal only. So I think last year we had something like 1.5 million full text downloads compared to a few tens of the print articles. And we also have a new subtitle, Environment and Society. And that's because we wanted to underscore the mutual relationship between the two. And also next year we'll take part in the Stockholm Plus 50 conference taking place in June. The first step of our anniversary celebration was to look back to see what we had accomplished so far. So in this year we published more than 50 articles on 10 different themes, from ozone layer to Anthropocene and solutions-oriented research. And all of these articles are freely available at the link you see down there. But now we're kind of, this conference is more looking ahead, what we want to accomplish in the future. So we rely on your input, how it should evolve. So this is more of a feed-forward approach, focusing on the future of this conference. And we very much, as I said, want to hear your thoughts. So today we will have speakers setting the stage. We'll have two panel discussions. One, what science do we need to tackle the current and future environmental challenges? Another on how to make Ambio research relevant to policy and practice, followed by group discussions for registered participants. And the input from today will discuss the editors and the advisory board members in the next coming months. And hopefully early next year, we'll present a new Ambio strategy. So if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can use Twitter, having the hashtag Ambio50. And registered participants on Zoom can send in the questions, the Q&As next to participants. And also this conference will be published at Academy's YouTube channel afterwards, so you can see it whenever you like, except for the group discussions then. I will finish this off with this short video, anniversary video, showing some of our editors and their thoughts. Thank you and welcome. My name is Bo Söderström, and I've been working as editor-in-chief of Ambio for the past 10 years. In 1972, the very first UN conference on the environment was held in Stockholm. This was also the year when the first issue of Ambio was published. All through 2021, we will commemorate 50 years of publication. A lot has happened since 1972, both with Ambio and the field of environmental research. While the 1970s focused on things like acidification and depletion of the ozone layer, today topics such as climate change, biodiversity loss, urbanization, and Anthropocene dominate.
Climate change represents one of the most pressing societal and scientific challenges of our time. As scientists, we can learn a great deal by taking a retrospective approach, analyzing where past predictions have succeeded or failed. Glaciers have continued to melt at rates faster than predicted. So it happens fast. We need to go from prediction to action. We know we have to act globally, and we have a strong younger generation who's putting pressure on politicians to listen to scientific facts and act. This is where Ambio is a perfect fit. People, environmental link.
We now have a much better knowledge of the impact that humans are having on the environment. Scientific evidence gives us insights to actions that we must prioritize in order to avoid dangerous tipping points across Earth systems. But purposefully driving change in socio-ecological systems is the key challenge we now face. The biodiversity and climate change crises continue to increase in urgency, but there are many actions that can be taken to reverse the trends. Land use change is one driver where policy can positively impact both biodiversity and climate emergencies. This is not just a question for natural scientists. Landscapes are also where people live, work, and play. Researchers have to engage with communities to co-produce strategies. This is why Ambio is a perfect fit, with its emphasis on the human-environment link for addressing the nature of these new challenges.
Finding solutions to wicked environmental problems, it entails a process of engagement and discussing knowledge and how knowledge could be applied in different situations. And while scientific knowledge is vital for tackling complex problems, it may not be enough for identifying solutions. Not something that academia and research can provide society with. It is something that we create together, and where academics and researchers need to be more involved in this process of turning knowledge into action.
I'm really happy for the t-shirt, not the least, and the great collection of articles in the anniversary collection. And we should give an extra round of applause, who are here in the Bear Hall for Bo. The impact factor of Ambio has actually almost increased by 3 times since he became the editor-in-chief. So small round of applause. I'm going to be the Toastmaster, or more formally, I'm going to be the moderator of this 50 years conference. My name is Fredrik Moberg. I'm working at the Stockholm Resilience Center at the Stockholm University, and also heading an organization called Eco. And we have a packed program, and we're already lagging a bit behind. It's going to be so exciting. And the only unpleasant thing that is going to happen is that I need to interrupt some interesting discussions and interesting talkers at time to be strict on time. So I will apologize already now for that, and looking forward to great talks and great discussions. And remember to ask questions through the Zoom link in the chat and use the hashtag Ambio50. And with no further ado, let's go into the program. The first speaker. Our next speaker, the first speaker, is a professor in history, science, and technology at the Institute of Technology here in Stockholm. He's a popular science author and a frequent contributor to public debate in Sweden. And he has written an extremely nice review of what has happened with the issue of environment and environmental research over the last 50 years in the anniversary collection. And I think that his talk will be kind of a summary of that paper. So read it after you have listened to Sverker, or listen to Sverker and then read it afterwards. So, please, Sverker Sörlin.
Thank you very much indeed for this introduction, and great to be with you today for this 50th anniversary session. Yes, it is true that the background to what I'm going to say today is this review article of the past 50 years with Ambio. And I also inserted in this first slide the cover of the very first issue back in 1972, which I think is really very much actually an Anthropocene kind of image, isn't it? Way before the concept came into circulation. Another background for this is a fairly large research project that I'm heading, an ERC advanced grant project with partners at Berkeley, Cambridge, Florence University, European University Institute, and myself based at the Royal Institute of Technology here in Stockholm. And we are actually studying the planetary human environment relationship and the policies, the global environmental governance that has emerged from that relationship since the Second World War. And I have an argument today that I also lay out in this piece in Ambio, namely that this is a journal which is quite special. It has co-evolved with Earth system science, like few, if any, really other journals. And it is also a journal that is focused on precisely the understanding of the human-Earth relationship in a broad sense. And I will try to underpin that statement in the course of my talk. And the first thing I want to say is that certainly this journal is not alone among environmental journals. There are hundreds of environmental journals, but the very large majority are specialized journals in disciplines and actually form subfields in chemistry, sociology, law, economics, history, archaeology, and many other areas. So in that regard, already from the beginning, I want to state that Ambio stands out as not being like those. It started as very much as a generalist kind of journal, and it has remained a generalist journal. Well, I'm an historian, as we heard, and this is a very famous historian. Back in the early 60s, E.H. Carr wrote this little book based on a series of lectures where he presented the then state of the art of history. In this book, the word environment is mentioned once, just in passing. There was very little. So all disciplines have changed very much, including history, over this past 50 or 60 or 70 years. We know the breakthrough with Rachel Carson in the early 60s, and that was just about the same time as an historian was lagging behind, and here is a biologist pointing the way forward, you could say. The most outstanding, really, historian we want to observe here, just because he talks a bit more about the environment, is Fernand Braudel. And he wrote a big series of books about the history of the Mediterranean. And he talked about the environment in a famous introduction to this work, an introduction of 350 pages. But what language did he use when he talked about the environment in the late 40s? He talked about it as a very slow-moving thing. It was hindrances, limits, biological realities, constraints, stable elements. He even used the French expression quasi-immobile, almost immobile. So he depicted a picture of the environment as a slow-moving stabilizer, as an arena for societal change. But he did introduce the environment, and so much has happened since then. This is our contribution, and I base some of what I say here on this book in the middle here, a book about the history of the idea of the environment as it has evolved in the past 70 years. And it has also changed quite a bit. It is one of the most successful political concepts you could think about. It has really changed the world, and Ambio has been an important part of that change. This ecologist really also provided some important stuff in the late 40s, because the late 40s is a turning point. His name was William Vogt. He was an ornithologist, and he studied Latin America, and he was very much interested in the big issue at that time, which was population growth. He was very concerned. So the alarmist kind of writing. But just as important to keep in mind when you talk about the growth of the environment as a modern issue is that it came from another side of the spectrum, so to speak, from the American military, who started talking about the environment in the late 40s and early 50s for warfare. From the highest places in the sky, so to speak, the stratosphere, and all the way down to the seafloor, that was the human environment that you needed to master if you wanted to win future wars. So the mobilization of science for the environment came from many directions. It was about resources. It was also this, for example, peak oil, a concept from the late 1940s, and the nuclear testing, where the fallouts were spreading around the world. A sense of globality became more tangible with the environment in a focus. And there were popular movements, there were media attention to it, and we know quite a bit about this growth. It got an early peak in Stockholm, precisely, in 1972. And here we can see Maurice Strong, himself an oil man from Canada, shaking hands with a Swedish politician who was the general, also the president of this meeting. And at the bottom, we had Barbara Ward, the economist, who wrote one of the background documents to this. Now, it's actually after this conference that Ambio starts to play a role, of course, because it was founded in the same year. And we can see a sequence of meetings happening. And I think that is the one important feature of Ambio. Ambio doesn't forget when important policy things are happening. And this is a talk 10 years later, in the early 80s, by Maurice Strong at the conference in Rättvik in Sweden, where a number of important scientists had gathered, among them Gordon Goodman, who was also here in Stockholm. And they had visionary ideas of how to change and move on from beyond Stockholm. That was also the time in the late 70s and early 80s when some scientists started piecing together the bits of information that they had gathered over a long time of research in many disciplines. And they started using the concept of systems to apply to the entire, not just the ecosystem, but the entire Earth system. And part of my claim here today is that Ambio is really a journal that has co-evolved with the emergence and growth of the Earth system as a concept, like no other journal. And one of the important people here in the early years was a Swiss scientist, geophysicist. His name was Hans Oeschger. And I think it's a little bit cute, this model, isn't it? Where it looks a little bit primitive compared to the sophisticated things you have today. But it's just to demonstrate that there's a strong link between his field work on Greenland's glacier, where he were among the people who brought up together with, for example, Ville Damsgaard, the Danish scientist. They brought up this ice cores from Greenland, which of course also pointed to the rapid change that was possible in transition periods, the so-called Oeschger-Damsgaard periods, which meant a lot to understanding the rapid change. Just a few years later, from NASA, came these overview studies of Earth system science. It became a concept, it became a community, it started building institutions, and for every contribution, you can see the traces of this in the pages of Ambio, where I've picked up actually quite a bit of the information I give. This famous, also quite primitive, you could say these days, Brotherton diagram from Francis Brotherton's. He was one of the leading people in this development. You should note human activities on the right-hand side. There were some. I think, in fact, their significance has been growing since 1988. So this is a development, again, that can be captured in Ambio. If you look at the early thematic issues, for example, they would be about a little bit older, more classical issues, more limited toxics, for example, mangrove forests, these kinds of things. But in the early 90s, you can see how the Earth system perspective eats itself literally into the pages of the journal. Some people were particularly significant in this development of the journal and of contributions to it. And I would like to hear, among many people, single out a couple. On the left-hand side is Thomas Roswall, a Swedish scientist who had a great career, still around. And he worked for ICSO in Paris and so on and so forth. But in the 80s, he took on a position here in the academy, actually, and it started actually in the late 80s, to work with the Global Change Program and the IGBP. And every issue, he brought some news from that area. So the other person that I point to here is Norman Myers, a British biologist and popular science writer and conservationist, you could also say. He also contributed very frequently to Ambio. And they started talking in the 80s about another feature I think is very important, namely the growth of market solutions for the environment. And he asked the question, should there be more government or better governance? And that's when the 80s is when the governance concept enters into not just the pages of Ambio, but also into the discourse more generally. So this is not just the same kind of language, it changes over time. And if you go back just a few years, you find the Paris meeting moment of actually rejoice and happiness of the agreement that was reached. But if you follow the traces back, you can follow it not just to Ambio, of course, but you can follow it to the discussions that were presented in Ambio pages. There are connections throughout. And a little bit of history again here. If you look at the biosphere, for example, as a concept, coined in the 1920s, in the same decade, Vladimir Vernadsky, a Polish scientist, coined the concept of biosphere. And so these kinds of overarching concepts are very important for this understanding. And I underscore the concepts because they somehow capture the spirit of the science. And one of the most important ones was the Anthropocene, coined in 2000 by Paul Crutzen. And Crutzen is important also because, well, he was linked to Stockholm, he was linked to the academy, he was linked to the very first issues of Ambio. He, as a licentiate, he was already hired in the fall of 1972 to serve on the editorial board of Ambio. And he stayed always in vicinity of the journal. He died earlier this year. And here is the famous Anthropocene hockey stickers that we have seen many of in the last couple of decades. And I should also really point to the important article that he published together with historian John McNeil and the scientist Will Steffen back in 2007. As far as I know, the most highly cited Ambio article over the years. I have a special relationship to it myself because I was a reviewer of it, and I would say it was the briefest review I have ever written. I simply said, this is going to be a much discussed and somewhat controversial article, but it's written by 3 great scientists and publish it quickly. And that's about what I wrote, and it was published quickly. And again, if you go back to the pages of Ambio in the last 10 to 15 years, you find lots of evidence of the Earth system science approach and the Anthropocene approach. For example, in this Nobel Symposium special issue that you see on the left-hand side. I would like to underscore not just concepts, but also the institutions. In Stockholm, it's not just the academy, it's also the Stockholm Environment Institute. You find the Stockholm Resilience Center, and you find conceptual development in these places as well. For example, the planetary boundaries concept. These stay. If you can build institutions and if you can build concepts, your chances to getting your ideas out is much bigger. And from Crutzen also, there's a strong lineage back into the recent past. Here's Bert Bolin, for example, who was also working in Stockholm, a key voice in the academy in the late 60s and early 70s, crucial in making both Ambio happen and other institutional developments. And he was the supervisor for Paul Crutzen, who came here as a data programmer, actually, in the late 1950s. Okay. And behind him, in turn, there was also lineage going all the way back to Svante Arrhenius, who, as we know, famously made the equations for global warming, so to speak, and predicted the temperature change very accurately in the 90s. And from him, there's a strict link directly to Carl Gustav Rossby, who created the physicist and meteorologist who created another journal, Tellus, that actually is a kind of a twin member of the Stockholm family of journals, to which you can also now point to Ecology and Society, which has also contributed within the same field of Earth system science. And that is a strength if you're building a community and think about the way institutions and concepts can work together. And who was the student of Carl Gustav Rossby? Well, that was Bert Bolin that we just heard about. So there's a continuity here that feeds into the success of Ambio, and certainly also the success of Tellus, which has been a very important journal in the geophysics, meteorology, and climate science area. It has also strong links to some of the major centers around the world. And really a favorite of mine is this link to the computer project in Princeton in the late 40s and early 50s, where they, of course, wanted Rossby to take the lead, but he didn't want it himself. So, but Bolin also went there. And a similar computer was built in Stockholm, which was for a while the best really in the world and made it possible for Sweden to take a leading position in numerical weather predictions in the 50s. And I think at a moment like this, when we commemorate 50 years, we should also look a little bit at the modern fieldwork, the equipment that is used and the technology that goes into this. Satellites, for example, are needed. And the new assemblages that we get from various technologies and how the new science can be demonstrated in curves and figures and numbers and those kinds of devices with which we can think and act more clearly. And the Mauna Loa Observatory, of course, in Hawaii being crucial for climate science set up there by Keeling. Now, what is happening, I think, in recent years and over this period that I've been talking about is that you can see an emergence of what we call in our research environmental objects that turn into governable objects. What we used to have with the biosphere and the atmosphere and the cryosphere and so on was a kind of a pretty sort of amorphous background. What has crystallized from these are, through the Earth system understanding, are objects that we can identify more clearly and, so to speak, act upon. And they are described through these concepts and this knowledge. So the link between the nature and the environment and the actions that are possible to take in the society, I think has been improved through this research. So the Earth system science is not just a science understanding, it is a way of bringing nature closer to becoming actionable, so to speak. And in this, we work with many other people around the world. And one of them that has written very, very interestingly about this is this young woman, historian of science at Harvard, Leah Aronofsky. I just wanted to also show that because this is again evidence how the natural science forms alliances with rising social science and humanities, as we can see as the politics of new green transformations and climate transformations is now gaining ground. A couple of key figures from the Science Policy Research Institute in Sussex, I would like to mention here. My own colleague Johan Schott to the left, who's a historian, and the by now very famous economist Mariana Mazzucato, who has pointed to how you can think about transformations and how you can promote them happening in society. So this is a development that is somehow, maybe these are the people you don't think about when you hear the concept of Earth system science, or even when you hear the word Ambio. But in my analysis here, I think they actually belong in the same broad transformative process. So Ambio has a position in this. If you go back and read over the 50 years that I've done, 4,000 articles, I think, or something like that. I haven't read them all, certainly, but they are, it's a rich universe of knowledge there. And it points to taking a position in that evolution. So my conclusion, if I may say so, after having worked with the 50 years of Ambio, I'd say it's important to stress that it is a generalist journal. It couldn't have taken this role if it had been a sub-field, covering a sub-field of some specialist discipline. It needed this broadness, from specialist inquiry to systemic understanding to policy engagement. They belong together, so to speak. They are also, as I try to argue, embedded. This journal is embedded in a scientific and political and institutional context. I haven't said much about the politics here. It's somehow in the background, but you can easily find that you don't have a UN 1972 conference without some political play in the background, and you don't build these institutions over time unless you have some pretty constructive relationship with politics. And I think that perhaps most important thing to say is that when you have a journal, you should have success criteria. We've heard about the citations and the indexes and so on. They are important. But I think the ultimate success criteria for Ambio over the years has been tacitly, that you don't need to go to the public square and scream it out every day. It's somehow in the walls that you should assist action to improve human-earth relationship. That's the point of the whole thing, that it actually assists action. And that's something that the 350 or so other journals don't do in the same way. So I think this is a very important thing to learn from the experience of Ambio. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Really nice birthday speech for this young journal, only 50 years. You were right. The paper by Stephen Crutzen McNeil is the most cited paper. And actually, the next speaker was the first author of the second most cited paper ever in Ambio. He has also written no less than 24 articles in Ambio over the years. He is one of the most cited researchers in his field. And he's a professor of natural resource management. He's the director of the Barron Institute, and he's the founder and chair of the Stockholm Resilience Center. Please, Carl Folke.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to be part of celebration of fantastic journal. I really like what Sverker said at the end there, how Ambio really assists researchers and scientists to help move forward a lot of disciplines. So what I will do today is basically give you some flashpoints in my own experience with Ambio and what it has meant and a little bit into the future at the same time. So back in '91, when we restarted the Barron Institute for Ecological Economics here at the Academy, we did a background piece, a very thick discussion paper, which later on became the first sort of article in a special issue that we did with them. And I would say that doing that special issue and another one the next year was absolutely fundamental to bring these type of issues alive. And in that issue, actually, in the first paper here, we presented this mindset that I think has developed a lot. It came from Herman Dale in the 70s, but the point that alludes to what Sverker talked about, that we are embedded in the planet, that we are part of the Earth system and are shaping it. I think that has been a core of Ambio. And nowadays, we have a lot of work with the SDGs that are often placed in this same type of context, and also a very recent big effort that came out from the treasurer in the UK, the Sub-Saharan review to the left there, where he has a leading economist now really make the point and emphasize it strongly, the embeddedness of human societies in the planet. And I think that's a big mind shift that has happened compared to when the Silent Spring started with Richard Carson, where we polluted something external to us. But nowadays we start to realize that we're part of this. And Sverker had some beautiful quotes from the 50s also, saying that we have to understand that we're living on a planet. So I think that's coming back as a very strong conceptual frame now all over the place. The realization also in business communities and others that if the planet isn't healthy, it's hard to live on it. Next year, then we published the other special issue. And this was a research program we had on the ecology and economics of biodiversity loss, which was at that time completely novel, actually. And I think it had inspired some of the things like the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, these type of efforts. And we did something at that time completely impossible, actually. Publish a paper on indigenous knowledge. That was really, really sort of off the wall at that time. And I was lucky to start to work with Madhav Gadgil and Pete Burgess, who started to look at the practices of many societies that survived for thousands of years and how they have lived and evolved with their ecosystems. And fantastically, this is an example of Ambio, how Ambio is very brave, I think, very brave in planting seeds, testing things out, and some things are doing well, some things are blooming. And I think this area is very important now, and has of course had an enormous attention in journals like Nature and Science and others, but also in many policy fora, and a lot of policy fora in the UN. But here I highlighted the IPBS platform on science policy platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services that are really working very strongly with how to combine knowledge systems and how to interact them. And to the left is one of my favorite papers from Ambio, actually, by Maria Tenge, that really talks about this and the co-production of knowledge, which Sverker alluded to, and which I think is going to be a strong part of the future. Ambio is producing this co-production and science for change papers and pathways. The third one, again, the science policy interface, is when we did a background paper for the Johannesburg conference 10 years after Rio 2002, and then Ambio very nicely offered to make a synthesis of that paper in Ambio, and that's the paper that Fredrik mentioned before. It has worked really well, and that whole area has of course exploded a lot, as many of you know, and Sverker mentioned the Stockholm Resilience Center, that even has the name of resilience. So here are three recent frontiers that has been identified just a couple of weeks ago for social ecological resilience. And one is really to look at these as relational issues, cross-scale and co-evolutionary, and as capacities for transformative change, and also how these change interact across levels and scales, not just in societies, but with the Earth system. And I was really lucky to have a few really excellent colleagues to produce a recent piece now in July, actually, in Ambio on that topic. And the next one is cover that Sverker mentioned when we had in 2011 the third Nobel Laureate Symposium on Global Sustainability, magic moment, when the Secretary General of the Academy handed over signed documents of call for action from the Nobel laureates, Tarja Halonen there, who led a commission from the UN on sustainability. That we have the group of that sitting at the very bottom there, and they produced a report out of that. And Ambio produced a whole special feature of it, actually, fantastic special feature. And the second paper, I think, is one of the selected one for the 50-year jubilee, also very high paper by Will Steffen. And at that time, it brought together a lot of these issues and also the Stockholm Memorandum in the same place. So I think that's fantastic that Ambio is doing this type of support and synthesis for these type of issues. I just picked a handful of papers that I think are really excellent. And when you think about them, they are actually truly interdisciplinary in the sense of really not multidisciplinary, but interdisciplinary in the sense of combining the social and the natural, more or less all of them. So it's a snapshot of things, very, very good stuff that has continuously coming out in Ambio, I think. This spring in April, we had a sort of quite major gathering, actually. We had 25,000 people on this virtual meeting looking at it. And it was an attempt to try to bring together the state of science into action, actually, with a lot of leading politicians. It was called Our Planet, Our Future, and we organized it together with the Nobel Foundation and also the US Academy of Sciences. And when I talked to Boo about it, it was fantastic. The editor of Ambio, it was fantastic that you invited us to produce the background paper for that meeting in Ambio, actually. So that came out now in April, and I think it has been downloaded 26,000 times already, or something like that. So it's a sort of state of the art of what these authors at least think of are some of the major challenges going on today. And here is one picture of it representing beautiful biodiversity by an artist in Chile. And here is the content of the paper. So what some of the points we made is really this intertwined planet, our people and nature, and really that we are headed in the planet and in the biosphere. And we made a synthesis of the climate and biodiversity challenges, and also the inequality and global sustainability challenges. And the two things to the right are the sort of forward-looking ones here, but really about societal transformations together with technological change, all the way from sort of hardcore things to imaginary orders and narratives for the future. And making the plea at the end for the necessity of revitalizing, not just getting rid of the emissions, but also revitalizing the planet for our own sake and for our own prosperity. And it ended up with a call for action, actually, which is called Our Planet, Our Future. And that call for action is now going into all the big UN meetings that we have coming ahead: the climate, the biodiversity, the food, and so on and so forth. It's been signed by 126 Nobel laureates, which, if I understand it correctly, is quite a new record for that. And the Nobel laureates, not just in the natural sciences, but also Peace Prize and literature. And at the end of that paper, we also make the point, of course, that this is, in my mind, at least one of the biggest challenges for us. And I think that's what Ambio is going to wrestle with a lot into the future. Really how we as a species are going to navigate ourselves into sustainable futures, basically, and transform ourselves into sustainable futures. And those sustainable futures has to account for the capacity of the planet if it's going to work. This is my last slide. So I'm ending with a beautiful summary. It's a bit like what Sverker talked about, but a bit from another angle, more from the sort of living system perspective by Georgina Mays, actually, who left us about 1.5–2 years ago, where she's been going through sort of different mindsets on the view of nature. Really from when I started in the early 80s, it was really about conserving versus development, a lot of tension there. And then we had the whole idea of people serving, or nature serving people, and now more the embedded and intertwined world. And I guess the next will really be the world of science that becomes extremely important in science for change. So the role of science in the supporting transformations towards sustainable futures, to be able to provide the best understanding and do that in a collaborative way with a lot of actors, not just informing, but actually co-producing solutions based on that. And my own experience from such processes is now with big seafood companies. We have gathered 10 of them, the biggest one in the world, in something called CBOS, where we collaborate to try to shift them from looking at themselves as producers of a commodity to become stewards of the oceans, health of the oceans. And it's going extremely well, much better than I had ever believed when we started this process. So I would just like to end this very brief overview with saying that, as you all know, that the Ambio is a journal of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. It is a fantastic journal. I think it's a journal, a unique one. Sverker made that point very strongly, that it's different from many of the other journals, that you really have this being alert for what's going on and creating space for novelty. And some of these seeds will bloom into beautiful things and are very important. And I think Ambio is something to be really happy about and really proud about. Thank you very much.
It's so nice, this sort of view of scientists describing problems, going to understanding the whole system, and then actually being more science-based systemic change makers. And you write about that in one of the papers together with Nils Kautsky as well in the anniversary collection. So if you want to hear more about that and how you can be that, it's all written in that paper. So I recommend some reading. Both Sverker and Carl will come back later on in the panel, and I think we will have more opportunities to discuss the role of science and the scientists in the processes that Carl was talking about. So the next speaker is, she has a long experience of working with water, agriculture, and food security in the drylands of Sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia as well. She's a professor in agricultural water management at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. Please, Jenny Barron.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for being here. It's really an honor to be here and also to speak after these eminent recaps of what Ambio has inspired to and what we do today. The case I'm bringing here today is very much a very practical case on how we try to operationalize what some of those inspirational examples were brought up by Sverker and Kalle. And this will be in my own field of agricultural research. We call it productive landscapes these days, and it's definitely close to call to action. So I would like to start with, let's see, here we are. I would like to start with this will be my talking points on this topic, and think of it as a continuation on a very specific case where we try to do this transdisciplinary research and put it into action, co-producing new knowledge. And this is definitely the basis and the starting point for the work that I'm going to summarize or synthesize for you today. So my perspective is very much food production at the higher global level. And I'll mention a few critical challenges and stressors that we use as an entry point into this problem in our productive landscapes. I'll present the case studies of mismatch in evidence from global to local perspectives and the need for new knowledge, innovation, and solutions in going forward in the action that Carl referred to. So first of all, it was already mentioned that this is not necessarily always a problem of the commons anymore. Businesses, markets are really engaged and involved in the issues of environmental risks and stressors. And this is a summary of the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report that they have and they do every year. And here we see that water and extreme weather and climate change is topping the lists every year for the last 10 years or so. And that's a very powerful acknowledgement of the issues we need to resolve in agriculture and productive landscapes. We also have, helpfully, a lot of other crisis reports coming with regular intervals. And luckily this year, we also have the entry point of the UN food systems, like Kalle was mentioning, and the IPCC IR6 saying that we're facing more extreme weather, not the least in our breadbasket regions in the world. And we contributed ourselves to the Food and Agriculture report, the State of Food and Agriculture 2020 on water security, and of course the global risk that I mentioned. But what is also really important is that increasingly, even at the global level, at the big policy level, they are talking about the relevance and the importance of coupling scientific evidence and knowledge into the processes at every level and step of the way, which is very encouraging for that co-production state we want to reach into. So I just want to point out that often when we talk about the environment, the discourse is very much on the problems and the issues and the risks and the challenges. But we have also achieved some remarkable progress on certain things. And here, I just want to remind you that we're talking, when I talk about productive landscapes, we're talking about 500 million farmers that are actually doing things on the ground with the water and land and vegetation resources. And those are maybe the people that can also instigate a change if we want things to go into another direction, as in transforming our landscape and production systems. And these farmers are, of course, feeding all the other people on Earth. And now we're reaching about 8 billion, I think. And the other thing I wanted to make here as a background is the fact that, yes, there are many issues as IPCC and others are pointing out to us with regular intervals, and I'm not disregarding them in any way, but at the same time, we do have food for a lot of people in a lot of regions. And if we look on the transition in terms of, for example, a very simple indicator is a yield productivity vis-a-vis the land use for agriculture, for cropland. These are graphs from South Asia, where you can see that we have tripled the yield per hectare, whereas the total amount of cropland has been stable since the reference date 1960. In Sub-Saharan Africa, on the right-hand side, we see a very different development. There we have a land expansion as well as a productivity increase. And these patterns, we can take the map for different regions. And in North America, Western Europe, we have a similar pattern as in South Asia. We have a quite stable area, total area of cropland vis-a-vis productivity increase, and a slightly different pattern in Oceania, in New Zealand, and Australia. Okay, so my second talking point today was a mismatching evidence, and I put that as a question mark because we have these global insights, and they have developed over time, as Ambio has been one of the key leading publication that has allowed us to publish. And I just wanted to bring on what does it look like when we look on the ground. And this picture is a picture of intense investment area for agriculture development in semi-arid Ghana. And in the back, you see the water infrastructure. And to the left-hand side, the green area is the irrigation area. And on the front, you see what the soil looks like where they're farming. It's a pretty scarce or challenging agricultural soil. And you see that they have tried to at least pick up the stones to make tillage a little bit easier. And yet production landscapes transform into more productive states. And we see these trajectories, and there are more and more examples where this is happening, where production and environmental sustainability and economic development co-develop for the farming systems in these productive landscapes. And famous stories are, of course, in West Africa, the Niger Green Wall Initiative that had turned out to a subcontinental initiative. There are small reservoirs in West Africa invested in the post-drought of the 80s. There's the Indian watershed management that has been going on for more than 50 years, the Brazilian conservation agricultural story, but there are many. And my job is in part to try to capture some of these. And on the pictures, you see an example with 20 years apart, some afforestation efforts that is happening in many places of Ethiopia at the moment, and how tree cover is actually market-driven afforestation by smallholder farmers themselves. And in two examples here with different types of tree species. The examples here was actually a background study to one of these policy documents, the FAO Food and Agriculture Annual State of Food and Agriculture report last year, all we calling water scarcity in agriculture. And we were asked to develop 4 cases where we know that some sort of transformation has happened. And they were in different stage of scaling. So the Central America case is very much still in their research pilot stage, whereas the Indian case of the watershed development, the Brazilian example, and the Ethiopian examples are processes that has been going on for more than 20 years by different players. And just briefly on the Bundelkhand India Research and Innovation co-designed farming system, So what happened here is that farmers locally, they had an increase in population density, an increase in aridity, and you can see the transition of rainfall, annual rainfall, and the distribution in rainfall has changed about 20 years ago to a more arid type of climate, which challenged the farming system. And they have 2 or 3 crops a year in this semi-arid environment. And the traditional Haveli rainwater harvesting that has been supporting the agriculture was failing because of knowledge and tradition, because of local expertise, and because it was simply not coping very well with the new rainfall regime. So what happened was that researchers came in and together they co-designed, strengthened and an improved Haveli system, also a rainwater harvesting system, that you could say is an innovation of a traditional rainwater harvesting system. And that led to a scaling and an adoption that local policymakers took up for watershed development. And so in another about 20, I think there was 20,000 farmers they are working with now. And in Sweden alone, we only have 16,000 farmers altogether. So you understand the scale of piloting for transformation. In Ethiopia, Sustainable Land Management Program is a national program. It started in '76 and intensified in the 2000s. And it's an evolving strategy and scope with multiple partners, even if it's led by the state. And the phase 2 claims to have converted more than 860,000 hectares of land across 135 watersheds. So it's 2.5 of the total crop and pasture land area of Ethiopia. This is amazing achievements from a degraded state. And finally, the watershed management through conservation agriculture. You can measure similar yield productivity gains and scaling in terms of agricultural land under a different, more environmentally positive regime. And here, the turning point might actually have been that people could afford better tractors that could pull the implementation needed for conservation agriculture. And these became more available around 2000 and affordable. Finally, the need for new innovation, knowledge, and capacity. So these are new complex problems at the landscape level, and they are complex and they require multiple disciplines to come together. And we can find these positive landscape transformations, and they can be measured in terms of success, environmentally, social, and economically. And the process, what we find in our cases, most of the cases that has been scaled are 15 to 30 years, because before we can see the scaled evidence. And the critical components are known. There is technical and innovation management, in our case around soil, water, crop. There's partners and the consultative approach, the co-development that we were talking about, of new knowledge and innovation harnessing, and some sort of governance and institutional setting that can help give your stability. So finally, managing under uncertainty, you need to focus on solutions and innovations. And perhaps in research, coming from from research myself, I think that we need to focus more on harnessing these solutions and innovations that we come across in practice in real world and learn from them. We can define them and we can quantify the issues. We can document and learn from the processes, and we can develop solutions, co-develop solutions, and harness the innovations together with partners. And this is what I think we need to move from our journals and science to the action needed. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Really nice to start talking about the solutions and the action. We will have more opportunity later on to do that in the panel discussions. Jenny will come back as well. So now it's time for a short break. We're a bit behind, but not that much. I think we're doing a good job. So We will be back with Jeffrey McNeely, and we will be back with Catherine Richardson, and then a panel. But now, 5 minutes break. Take some opportunity to have a coffee and stretch your body or whatever. We will be back at 7 minutes past 2. Okay. All right, welcome back. We're going to continue with some extremely interesting talks before the first panel discussion. And the next speaker has worked in over 85 countries. He has edited over 40 books and published about 500 articles or so in the field of biodiversity conservation. He spent no less than 30 years at the International Union for Conservation of Nature as their chief scientist. And I just want to say hello to Thailand because I know that's where you are. Professor Jeffrey McNeely, please go ahead.
Okay. Now the trick is going to be putting up the PowerPoint, but I'm very glad to be here. And you know, when I look back on those 30 years with IUCN, and I start thinking about my carbon footprint, which I never thought about then. But I was traveling around to all those countries, and what did I contribute to climate change? Maybe quite a bit. But while we're talking about this, can somebody help my slideshow or my PowerPoint get put up? Peter, somebody? Is there technology possible here? Okay. There's somebody, okay, there we are. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. And I'm not sure how we change these slides. We go to the next one. I think I'll do it with, maybe I just push there. And let's see, how do we, can we get to it? How do we my internet connection is unstable. So the point is that change is a constant in life. And what I put up here is just all the different kinds of changes. And I'm sure that you can all think in your own life of changes like this that have happened to you. You know, you get married, or retrogressive, you flunk out of school. Accelerating changes, you know, climate change started slowly and then it really accelerated. COVID-19 really accelerated, and there's been maybe a catastrophic change. So we've got a lot of ways of changing. And what we need now are ways of adapting to all these different kinds of changes. So it isn't a matter of finding just one way of changing. We have to have lots of different ways to do it. So we go to the next slide. Yeah. We do, oops. Okay, so then we have the SDGs, which I'm not going to go into detail of these because I think everybody knows them pretty well. But the point is that this is the kind of response that society has come up with. And we've all heard that Ambio authors and contributors have contributed to virtually all of these sustainable development goals. But it's also worth keeping in mind that almost all of them are linked to biodiversity. And I'm going to just highlight a couple of those as we go along. Next. Okay, so we have human infrastructure. We heard earlier about the Anthropocene, and this is what you see spread around, and it goes way back, hundreds or thousands of tens of thousands of years. But Angkor Wat had a huge impact in Cambodia. Dams on every major river in the world, roads everywhere, cutting into ecosystems, highways. So infrastructure is a big concern for the kinds of biodiversity that we're trying to conserve. Okay, next. Then there's nature's infrastructure, which has its own way of working. And I put it up as a different kind of infrastructure because it works as infrastructure. And it's the kind of infrastructure that is supporting biodiversity. In the upper left is the Himalayas, where I worked for 2 years in Nepal, and parts of the have other ways of expressing nature's infrastructure, which supports biodiversity. Okay, the next slide. Yeah, okay, so how these two types of infrastructure relate is one of the key to how do we build partnerships for effective environmental management, because we're always going to have human infrastructure, as long as we're around, but we also need to have nature's infrastructure to support the human infrastructure and figure out ways for the human infrastructure to support the natural infrastructure. Okay, next. Next slide. Do we have a magician back there? We go. Okay, so nature's infrastructure comes from biodiversity, which, can we go back? Back one? Well, I can speak to it anyway. So biodiversity, it was a radical idea when it came out. It's genes, species, and ecosystems all together. And by having that, whoops, wait a minute, you're supposed to be on the next one. We have to coordinate a little bit here. The next slide, the one on biodiversity. Okay, so it's been a wonderful tournament. Wait a minute, go back. I'm on the biodiversity slide still, because there we go. Wonderful term for scientists. What biodiversity has done has been tremendous in terms of projects, journals, ways of looking at nature, ways of thinking about how nature functions. It's been wonderful. It's also generated billions of dollars of support for the kind of work in looking into how ecosystems function and how they provide benefits to people, and how we affect, in turn, the biodiversity. But, great term for us, a great idea for us. It's been very productive, but the public hardly knows about this term. Okay, next. Next, there we go. So one of the ways that we've been looking at biodiversity is the concept of ecosystem services. And we've heard about those in some of the previous talks and the work that's been done in Ambio publications. And these are just a few of the services that ecosystems provide. And looking at the services gives us a way of linking biodiversity more closely with people, because the benefits that come from biodiversity to people come through the form of ecosystem services. Next. Okay, one more. Next slide. There we go. So this is just a taxonomy, not to go into great details, but there are different kinds of ecosystem services, including, not least, cultural services. There are cultural benefits that come from ecosystems, and they're aesthetic, spiritual, religious, cultural heritage, a sense of place. All of these come from biodiversity, from ecosystems. Okay, next. And if we can go to the next one, they're also worth a lot of money. And so this is a way of helping people to think about why they're so important. And that previous slide showed that they're worth thousands and thousands of dollars per hectare. So how can Ambio help to put biodiversity in the public vocabulary? One is to target the governments through the relevant conventions. And I think governments, in fact, are coming along with this pretty well. because they're parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, all of the governments except one, which is the USA, which was active in the negotiation but has never ratified the convention, so it's not a party. Still goes to the Conference of Parties, but it's not a party. But still, there's lots of government interest in the convention and in its activities as it affects each individual country. So the governments are one of our good targets because they need the data that Ambio is able to present in Ambio, and give the people who are working on this within governments a window to which they can reach out more widely. It also is important to work with social media to reach especially young people. And maybe Ambio can start to work more on this with website, with chat rooms and various ways of reaching out to young people. And then the last one is working with businesses, and especially with the economic arguments, and even with regulations. And I want to talk about this a little bit more. Next. Okay, so there's a panel of experts that is going to the International Criminal Court in The Hague to suggest that ecocide become a crime, just like genocide is considered a crime by all the governments. And define ecocide as unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage.
5 minutes. Jeffrey,
to the
5 minutes now, please. 5 minutes left.
Say what?
You get 5 minutes left now, Jeffrey.
Okay. So, ecocide means that we could start to put legal teeth into the protection of biodiversity. Okay, next slide. Next slide, yeah. Okay, if you guys would help me with, there we go. So social media giving us opportunities. You know, when we were kids, we didn't have cell phones, but now everybody has cell phones, even in a remote part of Burma. Little young kids are already starting to use cell phones. So here's an opportunity for us to reach out to them. Next. So are we going to be in silos or in networks? And obviously we need to be in networks that are working together. We need to find ways of building influence through networking, through leaking out to others in different ways. We learn from them and we teach to them. Next. So adapting to the changing conditions, we got to have partnerships within governments, between the countries, and with the governments and the private sectors. I think we all know about this pretty well, but still it's a point that we need to keep in mind and to stress. Next. So here's what Ambio could do. What about forming partnerships among conservationists or people who are working in forests, some of the things we've heard about already, forming teams that can publish reports on key issues. And maybe we could help to identify key issues and find ways of reaching out to people who could pull teams together and then publish the reports they end up producing. That's a way where Ambio could help to accelerate some of these processes. Next. Then the legal structure. All of these conventions, I just put up some of them here, the Law of the Sea, climate change, CITES, trade in endangered species, Ramsar, wetlands, Law of the Sea, CBD, all of these need data. They need information. They need to know what's happening on the ground as they're trying to implement their conventions. And these are conventions that many of them have to do with influencing and now trying to implement. And maybe we can help them to see how they're doing, to assess the progress that they're making. Okay, next. next. One more slide. Okay. So we've also need to protect protected areas, which, you know, there's 40% of the forests are already in protected areas, storing carbon, providing all kinds of ecosystem benefits. And they're partners, especially with climate change and water. Those are the two big, most important links. And they're well represented in Ambio articles and could be more so in the future, because protected areas still need better management. Next. And there's the strategic plan for biodiversity, which is finishing this year, but there's a new global biodiversity framework that's being developed. And the question is, how can Ambio feed into it? How can we get the ideas that we're developing or that Ambio is developing and make sure that they become part of the new global biodiversity framework? And we can do this because it's an open process. They're listening, they're looking for new ideas. And if we can present them directly to them, we can have an influence on how the global biodiversity framework is going to be developed and implemented with billions of dollars behind it. Next. Okay, next. All right, so resilience of the poor is target 14. And there's a new kind of protected area that we just skipped by, which is called other effective management area. And this is especially to look, here it is, effective area-based conservation measures is a new type that is just being tried where people live. It's not separating people from the protected area, but having people living within the protected areas and manage them through traditional management and various other ways. But we still need support for this kind of approach, and maybe illustrations in Ambio of how this is working could be very, very helpful. Next. Okay, next. And support for these it looks at the economic benefits. Oops, I don't know, I skipped right past that one. But Ambio was very strong at the very beginning of looking at indigenous peoples. And Carl mentioned that because he was one of the ones with various others since at least 1993. There still is a challenge of making sure that rural people are able to contribute to the broader biodiversity and with protected areas. Next. This next one, if we can get to it. Hello, next. Okay, this guy, so when I was working in Nepal, one of the places where I did some work was in Chitwan, way down, oops, go back to that guy.
Jeffrey, sorry to interrupt, but we need you to wrap up within like a minute. Please, go ahead.
Okay. Could you show at least his picture? Okay. You don't want to show his picture? Okay. All right, well, there's this guy. So in Chitwan National Park, we tried to convince the local people that they could benefit from making it a national park. And here's an example of how they benefited. All these things that this guy has been able to do. All right, next. Next. And we look at sustainable management of water and sanitation. They've been showing how dynamic management, Hansky back in 2011 really showed how to do this in Ambio. Next. Okay, next. Sustainable modern energy, we can just skip out over there. Next. Next. Okay, and we have to have universal access to modern energy with link to biodiversity, which we can talk about later. Next. So social media, okay, we talked about that, all right. Next. Combat climate change and its impacts. Of course, this is forest. Next. All right, you know, forests, lungs of the earth. There they are. They store carbon. They give us oxygen, and they also help to build soil. Next. Next. Okay, and then the sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, reverse degradation, another SDG, protected areas especially. Next. Next, come on now. Let's see, revitalize global partnerships for sustainable development. Okay, next. You want me to quit? Next, next, next. And all of these big international agencies also need us to provide information for them because they're hungry for the kinds of information that we're providing. The point is that we need to work together so that we have a strong and unified voice that gives us the power to reach the government agencies, development banks, the private sectors, the broader public. We have to put biodiversity conservation high on all of these agendas. Okay.
Jeffrey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you. We had some technological problems, and I know you have so much interesting knowledge to share with us, and you will come back in 2 panels as well. So I hope the technological issues will be solved by then, because we really want to listen to what you have to say. Thanks, Jeffrey. All right, we need to move on. We're lagging a bit behind. It's my sort of inconvenient role to interrupt us and remind us about the time schedule. So let's go on. Now we have the next speaker, who was chair of the Danish Commission on Climate Change Policy, which had a huge influence on climate change policies in Denmark. Her research focuses on the ocean and the impacts on biogeochemical processes from climate change. She is also one of the leading scientists behind the Planetary Boundaries Framework, and I know she's working hard, I think even leading that process now to publish a new update on the planetary boundaries. And she's actually a citizen both in Denmark and in the United States. And this is a pre-recorded lecture because Professor Catherine Richardson couldn't be with us today live, but she has pre-recorded a really nice lecture for us. So Catherine Richardson, professor in biological oceanography at the University of Copenhagen. Go ahead.
First of all, let me apologize for not being there in person with you. It was certainly my intention to come when I was asked back in February to do this talk. But at that point, I couldn't have imagined that COVID would mean that my summer holiday would be in the middle of September. So if everything's gone according to plan, I'm barreling down a German Autobahn at this very moment. But I hope you're enjoying the meeting. Now, I was asked to speak about climate change and the biosphere. And I kind of suspect that the organizers thought I was going to talk about climate change's effects on the biosphere. But I've decided to turn it around. I want to look at the biosphere's effect on climate change, and in particular, to see what we can learn by looking at what we know about ocean and land biodiversity, or the biosphere in both of those components. Now, when we talk about climate, I mean, every planet has a climate, and we tend to talk about climate and mean all of the general conditions on Earth, the environment that we experience. In fact, climate is really only about the energy balance. How much of the energy that comes from the sun is stored near the surface of the Earth? How does it move around? What does it get into contact with? And so on. And we intuitively know that it's the interaction between this energy balance and life that makes the conditions on Earth. What makes this planet special is the fact that it has life. And of course, we know that both ocean biosphere and land biosphere are important for life on Earth. Why do we have oxygen in the atmosphere? Thank you very much, biology. Why do we have an ozone layer that protects us from the UV rays of the sun? Thank you, biology. Why do we have coal? We have coal because when green plants evolved, the bacteria that break down lignin, which makes plants stiff, hadn't yet evolved. So lots of plant material got stored, or accumulated, got buried, and became fossilized as coal. Now, I decided to turn this talk around and talk about the effect of biodiversity on climate actually in June when I was on a research cruise, and one of my colleagues read a poem that she'd made. Now, I'm not a real poem listener, believe me, but this one hit me right in the gut. Because what she'd done, I don't even remember what it was about, but what she'd done was she had started out using all the letters of the alphabet, and then as she went on writing, she took letters out and only would use words that had the remaining letters. Of course, in the beginning, as she removed letters, the text was still completely understandable. It was somewhat poorer than when she started, but it was completely understandable. And as time went on, the text became less and less understandable, and at the end, it was really just a series of grunts and noises. And I think we can look at biodiversity in just this way. We know biodiversity has a function in terms of controlling the conditions on Earth, but we don't really understand that function. We don't understand, if we want to stay in the poem's analogy, we don't understand the language that biodiversity actually speaks. If we want to look at what we do understand, because we have pieces of the puzzle, we have a little bit of the grammar in this language, we first of all have to consider the differences between organisms on land and organisms in the ocean. And of course, the first major difference is the size of these organisms. If you look out the window now, I'm pretty sure the first sign of nature you will see is a plant. And plants, trees are huge. Why are they big? They're big because they have to get water, and the water is down in the dark area where there isn't any possibility to do photosynthesis, so they have to get the water, they have to transport it to the factory, which the higher it is, the fewer competitors they have to get the light. So you have a factory where you're getting the water in at one place and you're producing the other place. Now, I'm willing to bet you haven't lain awake and worried about it at night, but when you're in the ocean, if you're an ocean plant, access to water's not a problem. And in fact, if you were as big as a tree in the ocean, you would quickly sink out of the surface water where there's light and you can do photosynthesis, so it would be a tremendous disadvantage. So we have this huge size difference in the plants, the primary producers that we have in the ocean and on land, and this turns out to be absolutely critical. Another major difference is what actually structures ecosystems. On land, as I indicated, water's really important. Getting access to resources is really important. And we know perfectly well that ecosystems, desert ecosystems and rainforest ecosystems operate very differently and have move elements around very differently. In the ocean, obviously access to water isn't a problem. So what is it that structures ocean ecosystems? No one really knows, but Victor Smetacek started championing the idea years ago, and I really do believe it, that it's probably predation. That, you know, if you look at a copepod and a shrimp and a lobster, they all look exactly the same. They've got the same basic body form. And you'd think, oh, well, genetically they must be very close. They're not. They're miles away from each other. But what is it that they all have? They all have a major jumping muscle to get out of the way to make sure that they don't get eaten. Of course, this has ramifications for the way we deal with the ocean, because what is fisheries? It's predation, one big predatory force that we put, which drives and shapes ecosystems. The final difference that I want to identify between ocean and land biosphere is the fact that human impacts have directly impacted the land biosphere much more than the ocean biosphere, at least when it comes to how the biosphere operates with climate. On land, we have about 550 gigatons of carbon that's built into biological organisms. We humans have changed that. We've changed the stocks. We've reduced the amount of carbon caught up in plants, because the major part of carbon is in plants. But even more importantly, we've reduced the residence time. We've reduced the stock by maybe about 10%, but we've halved the residence time. So instead of being an average of 14 years that a carbon atom remains in plant life, it's now down to 7. And that's, of course, because we've felled long-living forests and planted agriculture in its place. In the ocean, we only have something like 3, 4, maybe 5 gigatons of carbon. So it's it's bound up in living organisms. So it's clear that even though we have an extremely large fishery, it isn't changing the global carbon cycle nearly as much as what we've done on land. Now, the fact that we haven't directly impacted the biosphere in the ocean as much as that on land is actually a good thing, because right now, everyone is turning towards the ocean. The ocean is the last frontier. It's the great white hope. We have the FAO that's talking about the blue growth. We have the EU that's talking about the blue economy. And of course, the Americans aren't going to be left out. They're also focusing on the blue economy. We need to use the ocean. It is the last frontier, and we will use the ocean, but we need to learn from the mistakes that we've made on land. And one of the mistakes we've made is that we haven't respected the biodiversity. We haven't respected the biosphere. And we find ourselves now in the very expensive process of trying to reestablish nature where we've taken it away. We need to be very careful about the way we use the ocean. We need to start by giving the ocean, or giving ocean biota areas where they can develop after their own premises. So we have closed areas or areas in the ocean where nature can do its thing on its own. Now, if we think about how biodiversity or the biosphere impacts climate, then it's in terms of how the biosphere is transforming and transporting elements or molecules. In terms of climate, the most important of these, of course, are carbon, nitrogen, and water as a molecule. If we go on to land, we immediately and intuitively respect the fact that different ecosystems, be it desert or rainforest or agricultural systems, all have a different flux of carbon, nitrogen, and water with the environment around them. So we understand this intuitively, but we haven't actually quantified it very well. We're not in a good position when it comes to looking at all of land biota and how it interacts with climate. We know, though, that some of these ecosystems or biomes on land are very important in the Earth's climate history. We've identified tipping points or tipping elements, that is to say, things that either there or are not there at different times in the Earth's climate history. And that can be, some of these are biological. We have the Amazon, we have the boreal forests, and we talk about the fact that there can be tipping points that when they're gone, then that will have feedbacks on the climate system. We also know that there are changes in the ocean environment. Some people have identified the carbon pump, the way that phytoplankton fix carbon and transport it to the bottom of the ocean, as being a tipping point as well. We don't know for certain that it is a tipping point because we simply don't know how these ecosystems behave. Because all of the phytoplankton are so small, we have a tendency to focus on how they perform together, that is to say, their bulk properties. So we have a better picture, actually, even though we don't understand how different ecosystems work in the ocean, we have a better picture about how the sum total of plant activity in the ocean affects the climate cycle. And in fact, we know that when the Earth was moving from ice ages to non-ice ages, there was a change in the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere of about 80 parts per million. Now, the only place on the whole planet where you have enough labile CO2, enough that can move around at that kind of scale, is in the ocean. And therefore, we think that the ocean and ocean biology was very important in terms of making these changes that drove changes in climate. Obviously, when you have so little carbon bound up in organisms in the ocean, 5 as opposed to 550 gigatons, it isn't the plants themselves that store the ocean. So if biological processes in the ocean are going to lead to the sequestration of carbon, the storage of carbon, it has to be through sinking and getting into the deep ocean. And we call this the biological carbon pump. Now, it's wrong to call it a pump because it isn't active. The organisms are simply sinking out. But what we don't know is how different organisms actually feed into this process. What does it mean? The phytoplankton themselves are more different from each other than all of the green plants that we have. They have many different evolutionary starting points compared to green plants. And we know it makes a difference on land if you have cacti or nettles or redwoods. So why wouldn't it make a difference when we have different organisms? We don't know what these differences are, and I think this is a very exciting area in research that we need to be focusing on, right? And in fact, in my own research, we're focusing on taking up sediment cores from the deep ocean that we can analyze for environmental DNA in order to be able to go back and to record what kinds of plankton ecosystems did we have under different climate conditions, so we can make a more direct link between biological activity, ecosystem structure, and climate itself. So the take-home message from all of this, it's our politicians aren't the ones that get to decide all by themselves at a meeting in Paris what the future temperature, what the future climate of this planet will be like. Biology has something to say as well. I was involved in a paper that came out in 2018 where we actually went in and tried to quantify from the literature how much changes in biology, in the biosphere, could potentially warm the planet. If we as humans say, okay, we've warmed it to 2 degrees and the politicians have said it's going to stop here, how much would biological processes that either are not included in the climate models or are only very primitively included, how much could they further warm the Earth? It turns out that it's somewhere between a half and maybe up to almost a whole degree. That makes a whole lot of difference, that kind of warming. So it's essential that we actually begin to focus on understanding the language through which the biosphere and the climate communicate. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Role of oceans and that there are differences between ocean and land, and the language of the biosphere and the climate that we need to listen to. Oh, beautiful. It was a pleasure having her, although she was only online and pre-recorded. It was really good, I think. Thanks. All right, we are 10 minutes late, but we will solve that by taking the upcoming panel, having its full time, and then shorten the breakout group discussions a bit. And those group discussions that will come after this panel is only for registered participants. So if you're just watching this online over the live stream, you will only have a shorter break for your coffee, and then we will be welcome back again. Okay, we've had a bunch of really interesting speakers, and now we're gonna have a lot of them in the panel together. It will be Sverker Sörlin, it will be Carl Folke, it will be Jenny Barron, and also Jeffrey McNeely. Those we have already met previously during this conference, but we also have one new participant, and I hope Karen is with us, Karen O'Brien from the University of Oslo. Karen, are you there? Yes, then I will introduce you. Karen is a professor at the Department of Sociology and Human Geography at the University of Oslo. Her research focuses on climate change as a social issue and transformations to sustainability, and that we deeply need to understand us humans to be able to transform our societies to sustainability. Talking about the values, the creativity, the emotions, the collaboration, the empowerment, and the narratives that we need to deal with to be able to transform. She has participated in a number of IPCC reports and published and edited numerous articles and books, including one book called Climate and Society, Transforming the Future, who came out in 2019. And in the anniversary collection from Ambio, she calls for more deep transformations in a really nice article that I recommend you to read as well. Karen, please, welcome. Nice to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Now, I would like to see the panel in my monitor here as well, but otherwise I will have to do like this. It's going to be quite weird. Sorry, just a technical glitch. All right, we start. This is the 50 years celebration, but in 2046, we will celebrate 75 years of Ambio, I hope. And this first question is about, what do you think will be the main topics in the coming years of the 2020s, and perhaps even in the 2030s? And of course, I will start this question to Sverker, because I know you are in your anniversary collection article, looking back at the previous 50 years, you also speculate a bit about what will happen in the coming years as well. So Sverker, what do you think?
Yeah, well, good question. Of course, a historian is the last to talk about the future, actually. We're very skeptical to do that. But I think I would still speculate a little bit and say that, first of all, I think several of the talks already have alluded to, I think, what is a growing domain of relevance for this journal. So more and more society, action, practice, co-production have been heard. And even to the extent that we've heard proposals that maybe Ambio should promote activities, so to speak, on the ground among people actually transforming environments where they are living. For example, as Jeff underscored, that we can see conservation efforts now being produced with people rather than just for people. And I think that is a very likely evolution for a journal with a responsive taking kind of agenda as this journal is. And social, that means that we will probably get more and more articles written in co-production across what is also in the subtitle of the journal, namely environment and society, which means that specialists in social science and humanities, theology, religion, values, ideas, these kinds of things will probably grow. And also in political applications, because we want to act, haven't we all said that? We want more action. And I think more science and scholarship that is closer to that will increase. What I've advocated in my article about the journal is that given its very particular niche, which is actually not a niche, it's much broader than the niche, but it's kind of very remarkable specialization as being a generalist in a sense. It is also growing in size. And I think one could imagine that you could have, so to speak, breakout thematic publications, the way Nature has evolved into a range of special journals, because it's also becoming increasingly popular. We hear the number of pages are growing, the impact factor is growing, so it will attract more and more scholars to actually publish. So, and that needs to be managed somehow. And maybe there's a way of combining the core, like Nature is the core journal for the family of nature journals. You could imagine Ambio being a core flagship journal of what is actually a wider, so to speak, a little flotilla or armada of sailing ships that can contribute on the thematic level. But that needs very careful thinking. It needs caution, it needs ingenuity, but it will be a way of thinking about how to transform in the next 25 years.
Thinking about, I know that, Carl, you have already published 24 articles in Ambio. What will be the upcoming 24 articles focus?
Yeah, if I would be alive to do that, that would be fantastic. But I think we're going to see much more of ways of addressing the more turbulent times we are already moving into now, and potentially also more articles bringing in new dimensions of society. I really agreed with this, what Sverker said, so I won't repeat those, but solution-oriented efforts by whole sectors or by investors and others. I think that's an area that has not been that common in this interface. Another one I think which more of is that has occurred occasionally. That's the migration challenge, of course. We know that that some parts of Earth probably will be very warm, especially in tropical regions, and also perhaps won't get enough water in a not too far distance. So what are we going to? How is different parts of the world going to do about that? What type of governance structures can we develop to sort of still maintain some dignity and ethics in human relations when these type of changes happen? I think that's another domain that very likely will increase a lot, actually. And the third one, I think, is the one that has just started to emerge, is the whole new technological revolution that we're in, from synthetic biology to AI and machine learning, and how that can be much more nicely or strategically or in real world life connected to the biosphere, to revitalizing the planet and increasing the likelihood for good human life. So these are just three pathways that I think we'll see more in the future. And then I guess Karen will mention the deeper inner stuff also, but I'll let you talk about.
Yeah, I know, Karen, you definitely have things to say about this. I know you call for more deep transformations, so deeper understanding of what drives us humans. What do you think? What do you hope for the coming decades?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say I very much agree with Sverker and Carl's perspectives on, especially the idea that we are going through some very troubled times, and we are going to, a lot of people are already struggling with losses and trying to make sense of this world. And that's why I think that like wider and deeper approaches are very much needed. Right now, environmental issues are still like put in a box on the side as if they're, for environmental agencies and things. And when we start to really, dig down to what are the roots, and it really gets down to the, like, where do we draw the line between us and others, and how do we relate to nature and the future. And I think that the articles in, I see already that turn in Ambio towards that, relational perspectives and things coming out. And I think that there's a lot of room for that to promote not just sustainability out there, but, kind of from the inside out as well, and really merging them together and bringing them so that people can really start to take a healthy perspective on what we can do right here and right now to promote sustainability.
Thanks, Karen. I know, Ambio is already now discussing to have a sort of permanent solutions category among the articles. And I know, Jenna, you have thoughts on this, and maybe that's kind of what you hope for, besides more articles perhaps in the 2020s and 2030s about water and agriculture. You also sort of focused on the need for going to action and solutions. So is that what you hope for the coming decades, or?
I think, yeah, the Anthropocene environment issues are coming through and more, and it becomes clearer as you look back historically, like Carl and Sverker showed. Yeah, I definitely think that there is an urgency, and we're quite good in documenting the problems as scientists, as a big scientist community globally, and we're not as good as bringing out those positive solutions or innovation, and how do they come about, how did they happen, and what do they achieve, and how quick can they take? Can we transform with mobile phones? Can we transform in 5 years instead of 20, for example? The other thing that I think is going to be very important is coupled with human well-being. So, of course, I look at food security, but it's more, it's psychologically, it's mental well-being. And for example, I saw recently, a conservation initiative in Australia evaluated for environment benefits, agriculture production benefits, but also for the human health benefits of those NGOs and those communities that has taken part, and they valued that mental well-being in that. And I think that these are fantastic cases that we also need to have in the scientific evidence to promote and discuss with our policymakers and try to reach out on where we can achieve these. It's not always win-win, but at least sometimes we can achieve more than just the initial target. And we need to publish them. We need to have them and refer to them and learn across different geographies and spaces.
Thanks, Jenny. So Jeffrey, what do you think? Do you agree with the previous speakers, or do you have another wish list? You were talking about Ambio helping conservationists to publish important reports and articles on their particular issues. Is that something you wish for, or something else? You have to unmute, or perhaps someone can help him unmute.
Okay, how's that? Okay, so one of the things that I'm really struck by is the way that every kid you see has got a cell phone or an iPad. You know, they have access to more information than we could even dream about, or at least what I could even dream about when I was a kid. You know, it's just amazing how much information they have access to. I think one of our big challenges is making sure that they get access to good information, to get stuff that is science-based, because there's a big problem of disinformation. And with all the social media that's available, it's real easy for kids to get brainwashed. So I think we need to try to work hard to get the right information into the hands of these kids, into the minds of these kids. And one thing that I think that we might very reasonably expect in the next couple of decades is less consumption of meat. So you see it already. The hamburger chains are coming up with meatless hamburgers, and there's meatless chickens that are being sold by Colonel Sanders. So this is something, and there are good ecological and health reasons for doing that. And so maybe the younger generation, if they have access to the right kind of information, will start having a better diet, longer life, better health, and less impact on the environment. So what are the kind of data that we'll be able to generate and the kind of stories that we'll be able to tell that will capture their hearts and their minds and their healthy bodies? I think we've got a real opportunity with the social media that are available, and we have to make sure that we can take advantage of it by generating the right kind of information and then packaging it in the right kind of way that it communicates a clear message. I think that the whole idea of sustainable development has been remarkably successful, in that many things that you see when you're just going through a store, that they're on the label, it says this has been sustainably harvested, whatever that means. Well, maybe we can help people think about what it means to sustainably harvest, or to sustainably produce, or to cover your carbon footprint. Maybe we can come up with ways of measuring that, so that we do indeed have a more sustainable future, but only if we can measure it and demonstrate it with solid facts. So that's kind of the dream that I have.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I think it's interesting with sort of everybody having a mobile phone in their pockets, and the misinformation, disinformation, the post-truth debate and everything. And I know, Carl, in the paper that was published in Ambio after the Nobel Prize Summit, you had some thoughts on social media and transformations, etc. Do you want to pick that subject up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could be a fantastic source, but also really problematic, of course, like any technology. And I think it belongs to the whole category of the speed of the Anthropocene, where in terms of how fast we can communicate and do things. And of course, the jury's out there, but there are some reflections, I guess, on the stress in the younger generation of in the short term, keeping up and performing and showing how beautiful and fantastic lives they're living and things like that. So it's a lot of stressful things around it. So I think we, as Karin talked a little bit about, we really have to create that space for where you combine just being with the doing, actually. So you have more space for just being and not just doing all the time. I think that's really fundamental principle that has been going on as part of wisdom over cultures for long periods of time. And right now, I think especially our Western cultures, are very much up for high speed of doing all the time, and a little time for just being and perhaps reflecting and contemplating and discovering these deeper meanings and values. And in the last couple of years, I worked a bit on how people create meaning and values, or for those of you who read Harari's book, Sapiens, you may recall his concept of imagined orders there, actually, how people share stories, and then if a certain amount of people share them, then they sort of become truth for that group. And we see a lot of those, an enormous patchiness of these type of truths, sort of pseudo-truths or in the world today, I think, and the tensions that's emerging. So I think that's another side effect of social media also, that you tend to go into those with similar thoughts.
I just want to have a comment from Karen here. I know you do research on meaning making and the young generation. Is there hope in this sense?
Well, I think so. And I do think that it is like, who's making meaning? Because often we just serve science, facts to people, and then they take fake facts and things. And really we have to develop that critical thinking, that like engagement with the knowledge. And I think that's super important, because otherwise you go from, believing this when you read this and not this when you read that, instead of thinking, how do I understand this, and what, like a kind of a self-reflection on your own meaning making and your own assumptions, because it's very easy to then just follow, threads that other people are setting out, rather than actually thinking about, doing what we're calling science. And I think that creating, like, not just spreading research, but creating researchers is really important in order to really, be able to discern what is, what is a concern for us versus what is a, fake, just stuff that's being said and spread.
Thanks. I mean, time flies when you have a panel discussion like this, and I would love to have you all here in the room, because that would have been really nice. I have this Zoom fatigue, I feel, and maybe others have that out there as well, but this has been really nice. And we will need to have just time. Now we just have time for some closing remarks. And I want you to put those closing remarks in terms of giving an advice to the breakout group discussion that will follow after this for the registered participants. And I mean, the main take-home message from this, just 1 or 2 sentences each, to summarize the most important thing that you want the upcoming group discussion to bear in mind when talking about the future of Ambio and the scientific research it should cover. So really fast now, because we are short in time, 1, 2 sentences each, and I will start with Sverker. Please, Sverker.
I would like to hang on to the discussion that has just been happening here about truth and social media and so on. I think facts is not enough. We need sense-making narratives. And I think actually Ambio has provided some of those things by not being so specialized, but being more generalist. Somebody must take the responsibility for the broader narratives. And I think Ambio can play a role there, has played a role.
Thanks. Carl, please.
Yeah, 2 reflections. One, of course, is the urgent need for transforming away from the way we've been doing business today to sustainable futures. And if the discussion can think about how to do that a little bit faster, would be nice. And the other point in relation to that is, how do we do that and at the same time stay nurturing the biosphere, or stay within the safe operating space of the planet, so we can hopefully be 9 billion people in relative peace with some dignity. Thank you.
Thanks. Jenny, please.
Yeah, I'll just repeat, more focus on solutions and innovations for context-specific issues. And my second point would be for Ambio, especially, to keep providing that interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary academic dialogue space for critical reflections and to maintain that integrity.
Thanks. Jeffrey, please.
I think that one of the perspectives we need to, agreeing with all the stuff that's been said already, but I think that we still need to keep in mind that we need to be adaptable. We need to be able to adapt to change, adapt to new conditions that we might not see coming. So we have to build some flexibility into the way that we're approaching things. And I think this is part of it is maintaining a good network of information and of people you're talking with, so that you don't get stuck into a silo, that you really are able to draw from here, draw from there. And then when something happens, you're able to respond to it in some sort of innovative way. All right, so having said that, my second point is that I would really, really like to see a biodiversity conservation index. So we don't have that, but if we did, we could apply it to see how we're doing in the various things that we're trying to do around the world in conserving biodiversity and use it sustainably. What is the index by which we measure that? We don't have that. I would love to have that tool. And maybe Ambio could help through its networking. And certainly it has to have a social dimension to it, obviously, because people in biodiversity are part of the same thing. And I think it also needs to be linked with a healthy planet, healthy people. So linking biodiversity with human health in some sort of a biodiversity index
biodiversity conservation
that
index.
Package of things to do.
Thanks. Biodiversity conservation index might be something that is a beautiful word for us scientists. I don't know if it will fly outside, but I know it's important. So good point.
Well,
Karen,
we can come up with
please.
a good name for it. So yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I would just suggest that my advice would be to be very bold, because if we take the 50 years of articles from Ambio seriously, then we are in a critical decade, and it matters what we do now. And I think that that we actually don't have time to, for like tweaking things, but we actually, have to think about a different way of making impact, as Sverker mentioned this morning, beyond just, have a societal impact. And I think the journal can do that.
Thanks to all of you. I would love to continue hours and hours, but really good job from all of you. And just give them a round of applause, we who are here in the Bay Hall. And now for those of you who are registered participants, you know what to do. You have received the links to the breakout groups in your email in a PDF, I think. And from there on, you will be taken care of by a host in each of the breakout groups. So good luck with that. And for the others who are just following the live stream, you will have a 20 minutes break, and we will be back again at 3:30. All right, thanks for now. Right. Welcome back to the Ambio 50 Years Conference. I'm standing here reading in the amazing anniversary collection. I'm reading an article by Karen O'Brien, reflecting on the Anthropocene, the call for deeper transformations. It's a really interesting one. You should read it. And if you don't have time to read it, I think we will get kind of a summary of it, perhaps, or much more from Karen O'Brien. You know her from the panel discussion. And if you didn't listen to that one, just to remind you that she's a professor at the University of Oslo, focusing on climate change adaptation and transformation from a social perspective. So we're going to listen to Karen O'Brien, please.
Thank you, and thanks so much for inviting me. I'm going to share my screen just to get the PowerPoints on. And can you see that? Okay. Yeah, I'm going to talk about how we move from problems to solutions and how we engage people with transformations to sustainability. And it's not so much just on the need for deeper transformations, but it's really on, what is that relationship between individual change, collective change, and systems change? And how do we actually activate a sense of agency, not just for behavioral change, but for people to actually contribute to larger systems change. And what I want to talk about is something that I've been working on for the first with students, but also with municipalities and businesses, a way of engaging with change by focusing on change itself as an object. And I'm going to just start with thinking a little bit about transformations, because there's a lot of talk about transformations right now, and it can be thought of and defined in many ways. And I think of it almost classically as significant physical and or qualitative changes in form, structure, and meaning making. It's very much exemplified from the caterpillar to a butterfly metamorphosis, where changes in form and structure lead to new meaning making. And I think what we can also look at is how changes in meaning making actually influence the forms and the structures that we create in society. So, the many different dimensions of transformation, I think, are really important. And relating to the deeper dimensions, we have to look at transformation as this powerful unleashing of human potential to commit, care, and affect change for a better life, which Monica Sharma writes about in her work on scaling change. And this unleashing of human potential, this deeper dimension of transformations, means we have to kind of go beyond just thinking about it, but really connect with people's hearts and hands. And how do we actually activate social change at a rate, a scale, a speed, and a depth that is called for right now by the science of change. And one of the things that we've been talking about Ambio and the great contributions it's made, and I think that it really has been pioneering in starting to bring that discussion on transformations and how do we actually respond wisely to change. In my own work, I work with these three spheres of transformation: the practical, the political, and the personal, as one connected and simultaneous, kind of one way of, seeing and being in the world. And often most of the attention on sustainability, including through the Sustainable Development Goals, is very much focused on the practical sphere. We have emphasized behavioral change, we're emphasizing technological responses, and everything that is measurable and aligned with the 169 targets and all the indicators we have. And here's where we're failing, because we're not actually bending any curves, we're not protecting more biodiversity or meeting any of those targets. And the political sphere, the systems and the structures, the way we've organized society, the cultural and social norms, rules, regulations, institutions, infrastructure, that really influences what we can and cannot do. So it's something that I think, there's a lot of people working in those policy dimensions, in the political dimensions, and in the practical dimensions. But if we isolate that from the personal sphere, the individual and shared beliefs, values, worldviews, and paradigms through which we actually see the systems, we draw boundaries around systems, we see, our own role in terms of, leadership and everything, that, how we meet others in that political sphere and what we actually prioritize in the practical sphere. It doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from our own, subjectivity and experiences and things. And so rather than looking at these as all separate, I work in the practical sphere, you work in the political sphere, and she works in the personal sphere, or he works there, we can see them as all together and aligned. And zooming in on change, then, I think is really important. And I use a lot of Ambio articles in my teaching for the students, and it's very valuable to, to give a really concise introduction to the Anthropocene, to planetary boundaries, to a lot of the things that we've been talking about. But when we want to actually go from these kind of abstract concepts and understanding into what does this mean in practice, for practice, I think we have to look at more closely at how do we relate to change. And so in some of my graduate classes, I had a lot of frustrated students who just, the systems perspective just was too hard for them. It says, what is, how do I relate what I do every day to these larger scale systems? And so I developed just a very small 30-day experiment with change to encourage people to explore and inquire into that relationship between what they do and the larger things that we're talking about in terms of socio-ecological systems and earth system science, etc. And posing questions that actually trigger reflections, but also curiosity on the, what if I do this? How do I find out about this? And then bringing it, as almost like a lived experience for seeing how we're always related to these practical, political, and personal things. Instead of making sustainability as this 2030 or 2050 way off goal, it's like, what can I do right now? And how does that actually impact things? So asking people to make one small change has been really important as an entry point for getting people to look differently at change and relate differently to change. And that one small change could be something like eating a plant-based diet for 30 days, spending time in nature, consuming less, using no plastic bags, etc. And I've been using this, just in teaching, but also in my research on looking at how does this actually trigger a sense of agency? How does it actually activate people to be systems changer and to give us a different view of what collective change is about? In short, how does it help to engage people more deeply and actively with transformations to sustainability? And one of the things that I've really learned, and I've talked about this a number of times in other contexts, but I think that talking about the future of the journal as well, is that when you do something as an experiment, it actually generates a lot of curiosity. Right now in sustainability, there's a lot of like finger pointing and you should do this, you should do that. And coming from almost like treating people as objects to be changed, putting them right into that practical sphere and saying, how do we change people, rather than saying, how do we actually make people, like agents of themselves, agents of change. So when you do an experiment, when you actually are testing something, you talk about it very differently with your family, with your friends, with your colleagues, because it's not a right-wrong space. It's actually an exploratory space. And this leads to, rather than giving people carbon calculators or, saying that you need to, do X, Y, and Z, people themselves start to explore and do the research and see like, okay, what is the, this little seedling, how much carbon is it sequestering? What is the footprint of, my car rides versus plane rides versus bicycle rides, etc. And I think that also the emphasis on engaging people with change through a choice of change, like not imposing people with change, but saying, the choice you make actually is your own. And in other words, we're creating change as an object to be studied and looked at very scientifically, almost as a research object, rather than as a New Year's resolution or something that you have to do. And I've through the research, we found that just those conversations about what can I change really triggers a process of thinking about what I do and how I am in the world and what will make a difference. And that also creates a bigger sense of commitment, because for some people, they're already doing things very green and sometimes just, slowing down for an hour is a big challenge. For other people, it's, they've never done anything. And there's a big barrier for being like an environmentalist or, eating one plant-based meal a week is a stretch. So those are the kind of things that, you start to see that like, wow, deciding for yourself how to engage with change is important. But also supportive structures are important, because you see that it's one thing to, we say, oh, do this, do that because of the environment. But people become very aware right away that it's easy to say ride a bicycle, but you need the bicycle lanes, you need the, the menu choices, you need to have the systems and structures in place in society to actually support social change. And I think that that's one thing that often gets overlooked when we're just telling people to, be sustainable, be the change, etc. And it can have a disengaging effect if you don't actually have any support, because people just feel that they actually do not matter, that there's nothing that they can physically do. And that brings us to the power of social norms and cultural norms. And this little cartoon is on a coffee mug that I've had for 30 years. And it's just that no matter how individual we want to be, we are actually influenced by the larger social field and cultural field of what others are doing and what others are saying. And what we see in the research on these 30-day challenges is that it really helps to have a group or a container to be held by during these change experiments, so that they can talk about it with others and laugh about it with others, and actually, you know, recognize that this is not a, you know, this is not a permanent thing. This is an experiment. And what we start to see, that not only that our social norms are powerful, but we start to see that we actually can influence social norms as well, that we play a role in those by actually choosing to do different things, introducing different ways of talking. And suddenly you might find that your neighbors are very much also interested in not using plastic or whatever small change you might be doing. And when we approach change, especially for sustainability, it's often about, you know, like being perfect or being, you know, like, I think people get very, you know, it's very easy to give up when, you know, you've been very good and then you fly somewhere. I'm currently in Bratislava for the Earth System Governance conference. It's a hybrid conference, but the plenary sessions have been in person. And I think that those, you know, recognizing that there's trade-offs and recognizing the learning that we get through experimenting with change and failing is a really important dimension of this also. So, you know, in terms of process, being able to reflect on what we do is critical. And we talked about that earlier in terms of, you know, like all the knowledge and information is out there, but how do we reflect on, you know, what's actually going on here systematically, and what are my autopilot patterns, and how do I get out of them, and how do I actually influence, whether it's my university, my city, national policy, etc. How do we reflect on our relationship to multiple scales of change? And the way that, you know, what comes out of this is that it's not so much just the individual, you know, the changes that we do and getting people to change, but it's about the insights and the distinctions that people make, and sharing those insights and having these conversations actually can be game changers in terms of how we start to change. Because, you know, somebody's uncle may be the, you know, the CEO also of an oil company in Norway, or somebody's, you know, cousin could have, you know, have an amazing innovation. So those conversations we have matters, but it's really the aha moments that shift our meaning making over time and help us to see things very differently and to actually engage differently. So overall, you know, starting to see that we are not just these, you know, separate individuals, but we're always influencing each other, and that we are influencing systems. We are influencing the whole social and cultural narratives. It can be much more empowering than just, you know, giving people, you know, calculating how much carbon you release this week and things. And so we are trying to think about how to create, you know, large scale systems change rather than just, you know, through individual change as an entry point.
2 minutes now.
Pardon me?
2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes. Yeah, and this is my second to last slide. So sorry about that. I have 2 minutes on my phone. And I think this is really important for young people, because a lot of young people today, you know, we're handing them this this future that is not very positive, and we're not actually giving them that space and place to make that difference. And so when you can start to activate a sense of agency, whether it's among high school students or youth, people who are working in NGOs and on sustainability things, we start to see that those, you know, like that sense of the collective agency, that I'm not just alone, I'm part of this larger thing, and that we actually can start to shift systems and cultures in a very different way. So it goes right hand in hand with those deeper human dimensions, but the entry point cannot be like, the entry point has to be something that is very accessible and engaging for people to really start to look at sustainability from their own place where they're at, and then opening up that, widening the solutions place and seeing that people can actually make this much bigger difference. So yeah, thank you for, I'm sorry if I went over on time.
Thanks a lot, Karen. I love it when, I mean, how do you eat an elephant? You need to do it one bite at a time. And sort of approaching systems transformation with these curiosity-driven questions. Thanks for telling us all about that and what that can imply for how you can engage in transformations. Thank you. All right. It's time for another panel. And this panel will deal with how we make Ambio research, both Ambio in itself and the research that it covers, even more relevant to policy and practice. And for this, we will have a panel with distinguished guests. We have, see if we can get it here on the monitor. This panel will go on for approximately 20-25 minutes. And then we will have, after that, some breakout group discussions again, and then we will wrap it all up for the whole day with some closing remarks from some people. So, but first this panel. This is one that I really look forward to because I work a lot with communication of science and how to bring it across to people outside academia and get some real action going. So for this panel, we have Maria Schultz, who is working for SIDA, which is Sweden's government agency for development cooperation. You have been working at many different places and even been a colleague of mine. You were previously working at WWF in Sweden, working with marine issues, for instance. Welcome, Maria. You will soon. There will be opening statements from everybody as well. So Maria, just introducing you and then going on, and soon you will have the opportunity to do your opening statement. Jeffrey McNeely, still with us in Thailand. Where are you in Thailand? Oh, you're muted.
Unmute. Okay. I live maybe 200 kilometers south of Bangkok on the ocean, a place called Hua Hin. It's wonderful.
Okay, nice. All right, you are the former director of the Biodiversity program, and you've been chief scientist of IUCN, and now you're the advisor to governments and many other things. So we've already met you. So just to introduce you, you will have your opening statement soon. And then we have Mariana Biojone. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, so you need to correct me if I'm not doing that. And you are working as a publishing director at Springer Nature and also being especially responsible for the publication of Ambio. Welcome. And we also have Jakob Flipsen. Is that a correct pronunciation? Is it okay?
It's okay.
Thanks. You're the Vice President for Medicine and Life Sciences at Springer Nature. Very welcome.
Thank you.
And then the final panelist here is joining us from the United States. I don't know exactly where you are. Andrew Revkin. You've been an environmental journalist for a long time and contributing in many different ways to getting the science across to people outside academia. You ran the .earth blog at New York Times for a long time that I was a frequent reader of, for instance. And now you're also the director of the Initiative on Communication and Sustainability at Columbia University's Earth Institute. We look forward to hear more about that as well. Welcome to all of you. So, can you hear me fine, everybody in the panel? Good. Then I will open up for some opening statements. And the running order is Maria Schultz first, please.
Thanks. Do you hear me and do you see me and the presentation? It's a very short presentation, but thanks. It's great to be here with you. And just to pick up on what Karen O'Brien said and your picture here, Karen, I would like to stress, the importance of understanding in this process between science and policy and practical behavior changes or practical, actually, what's the things that actually make a change out in nature. I really like this picture by Karen, to show the complexity of the transformation from the personal, for example, Greta, who influences politics, the systems, and then how to influence the practical level. And then, of course, that it's across, that you have to work across these spheres in the same time. And Sorry, I just shall see if I can change here. But then the second issue I would like to stress is then, of course, to understand that it's the complexity of the different knowledge systems that we have. You know, science is one knowledge system, or many knowledge systems in itself with interdisciplinary science and so on. But then we have, you know, different actors, different worldviews, different values, as Karen was talking about. And we have, for example, if you have, one example is the tacit knowledge, the knowledge you get by osmosis in a village in the Ecuadorian Amazon, for example, when a young person spends time with an elder that paints a ball in an artistic way that actually is the mapping of the river system where they live. Or if you have, for example, a farmer which have inherited the knowledge and the sensitivity of the soil, that through smell, senses and so on can see the nutrient context, the content of that soil. Or a policymaker in a government office or a civil servant that might have to grasp directives and consequences of decisions under very tight time schedules. It's other kinds of time perspectives. So just to bring in, you know, that we have to have this kind of respect of the different knowledge systems, different situations we are in science to policy practice. I will end there for now, Fredrik.
I think we lost a small part of what you said in the end. So could you just repeat the last sentence or so?
Yeah, the main message I have is that we, of course, then have to understand, you know, that we are many, many different kinds of knowledge systems that have parts of the puzzle if we shall reach sustainability and the transformation we need to reach. And to understand this kind of knowledge system, it demands that we have respect, that we work with equality, and that we understand power relations. And when I have worked so much with different kinds of, as you know, Fredrik, as well, but in the international negotiations, for example, under the Convention on Biodiversity, where you try to bring in science into the negotiations, that demands the understanding of these kind of knowledge systems and so on, as Karen also expressed.
I really admire you because you've been in many of these big meetings and negotiating for Sweden, etc., and how to navigate that complex situation with trust and all the complexity behind it. So we will get back to that, I guess. And I know that Jeffrey, when you were speaking previously, we were also talking about the role of science to inform these big policy processes. So we will definitely get back to that, the role of science and how you can deal with that complexity later on in the discussion. Jeffrey, please, an opening statement from you.
Okay, I think, you know, just to build on the point that you just made, I think that there's a big demand for science. And so, you know, we should be in a position to respond to the need. It means identifying the need, but it's out there. I mean, you know, from all the conferences of parties of the conventions, that they really are looking for ways toward an answer. Not that they expect there to be magic answers, but to at least have a process toward better sustainability, towards improvement. Not necessarily a solution, but something toward a solution, steps along the way. And if we could come up with a way of assessing that and trying to promote that, I think then to take a totally different perspective.
We have some technological problems.
Here's something totally different.
Jeffrey. Yes, please go on. Now you're back.
Okay.
Back on again. Sorry.
I'll do the best I can. And that is looking at legal systems. And so if you look at climate change, what is really changing corporate behavior is when they get sued. So the lawsuits on the big oil companies over damage to the Great Barrier Reef, which is a World Heritage Site. Yeah, so the World Heritage Convention has been very effective in having an impact on major oil companies taking responsibility for the damage that they're causing. And I think that if we could start to do that for other industries that are having negative impacts on biodiversity, then we could start to make steps toward conservation of biodiversity, because responsibility is being assigned to those who are responsible for causing the problem. And that's not going to be most individual consumers. I think if we start at where the power is, it's in the big companies and in the trading systems, in the big trading blocks. So, we enjoy going to the World Heritage meetings, the CBD, the desertification, Ramsar. Those are wonderful meetings because we're talking about conservation. But what if you start going to the trade meetings where they hardly even mention the role that they have in the transport of invasive alien species and the impacts that that's having on biodiversity? They're not taking responsibility for it, and they should. And what about oil palm and what impact that is having on Amazonia? And so if we start to look at the production chain and then look at how the corporate sector can be influenced to improve their behavior, to take responsibility for it, and to come up with not like a carbon tax, but something like a biodiversity tax, looking at the lessons from carbon and applying it to biodiversity. And then I think we can...
Jeffrey, we need to go on. I think this is all great. Just move on. We will leave it that for the moment. I will now let in the people from Springer, because I'm really curious about what they think about how Ambio and this kind of research can become even more relevant for policy and practice. Please, Mariana.
Thanks, Fredrik. I think that being here and listening at the whole morning at what we had said and what everyone was saying was making Ambio even more important, and put Ambio in the middle of this, how to connect with all those players and how to connect with all, how to solve all those problems that you have been raising. So I think that looking at the past year, the past months, listening at what we had listened or hear in the morning, I think that there are three things that we can work with Ambio for the next years. Who are those people? Who are those players that we need to reach, that we need to connect? So are they decision makers, policy makers, multilateral institutions, officers, NGOs? Who are those people that are in the field or that are working? How can we engage with them? How can we bring them together to Ambio? How can we have them as editorial board members, reviewers, guest editors? How can we know what they need? What are their needs? And how can we connect with them? And in the end, how can we talk with them? How can we translate the information or interpret the information that we are currently publishing at Ambio to those needs and to those different words, can we say, different communities, and how can you speak their language? That is one thing that I think that Ambio can explore much more in the near future, and be part of what I think that Jaco is going to talk a little more, but all these open science initiatives and open access, and how can we cooperate to make science or the scientific knowledge that we're publishing in Ambio really available to these people in the original way, or in a way that can be interpreted and can be more toward their needs as, magazines, newspapers, policy briefs, blogs, blurbs, infographics, a lot of different things that you can use to really reach and to really get into these people.
Thank you. Of course, the open access, and also for people who can't afford to pay the fees, etc., is so important. And Jaco, please.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. It's a privilege, so I'm glad to be able to join the session today. Just a few words from my end as an academic publisher, because obviously we have a large network that review and improve, disseminate content already for a long time. And historically, that has shown to help science progress. But at the same time, we believe that scholarly publishing industry has a wider role to play in relation to the global challenges. and that is the to be the driver towards open science. And maybe the last 20 months have provided a perfect showcase on why open access does matter, and how publishing open research have helped the world to combat the COVID-19 crisis and speed up the response time to solutions. So what are we doing as an academic publisher? We're changing business models to favor open access, use of preprints, open peer review, open data sharing. They're all tactics that we already have in place to wider spread information beyond the traditional readers, the academics. It allows actors, such as policymakers, practitioners, to make informed decisions. But I think it's important to hang on to make sure that it's evidence-based and that materials are reviewed. From a portfolio perspective, we as a publisher try to find home to all scientific sound submissions, whether it's high impact or whether it's sound science or something in between, as after all, they all contribute to the global knowledge base that is important to find the solutions of today's world. Also, we're taking an approach to link our content more and more towards the global challenges of the world, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And the motto here is be relevant. What you publish has to have a relation to today's problems. And finally, from a social point of view, we embrace diversity and inclusion. We look for equity to publish, and we try to bring together the research from the global south and the north. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we continue with the opening statements, and please, Andrew, where are you? Where are you in the States?
I'm in the Hudson River Valley, north of New York City, in Lenape territory here, before Henry Hudson poked his ship into the river in 1609, Henrik Hudson. And as you were saying earlier, I've been at this a long time. My main takeaway at the beginning is we're all in publishing and in academia in a grand transition from the old model. Even the word professor is to profess. You're kind of conveying stuff in a one-way direction, to journalism, which again, and here's just to show you a couple of little artifacts. This was 1985 and 1988. Nuclear Winter, two issues very familiar to Ambio consumers. Nuclear Winter to global warming. And I'm not really focusing on that stuff so much these days, because I've really, based on what Karen was saying earlier too, I've known her for a long time, the paths of progress here are not through exposition as much as conversation. So the more that we focus on building active, dynamic conversations among disciplines, among layers of society, maximizing the voice of those who've been left out of the conversation, and in this case, who haven't had access to journal knowledge because they're in poor countries, without putting the focus right in the foreground on facilitating conversation, we're going to lose out. That doesn't mean, as we said earlier, having a science base is really important for the stuff we convey through journals and journalism. The journalism is all about trying to figure out what's real. But getting to that transformation or transition point that Karen was describing earlier, if you really want to focus there, then it's really about conversation, and that whether that means investing more in the web presence or focusing a special issue on the behavioral gaps, the fundamental and deep gaps in understanding of what prompts change in people. Karen was describing some of that literature. It was because of a session I did, one of my live webcasts, we could talk about those later, that I learned from Indra Overland over in Europe. He and Sovakul have written a paper in January saying that basically when you look at climate research funding, social science is like this tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of that body of funding. And when you think about everything was just said about whether societies act or don't act on climate change or biodiversity loss, is all about human behavior and societal behavior and how we connect to or reject information. So if we're so underinvested in that basic understanding, of how that works. And frankly, I've done probably 36 sessions of my webcast with scientists who are laying that out. Then we're just going to be spinning our wheels. So that's my main point, moving from better storytelling and publishing to better conversations.
That's so interesting. I mean, with this sort of storytelling aspects and also going from the linear view of sort of bridging the gap between science and policy and practice to actually having that conversation is something that I think is so interesting. And I know, Maria,
well, I'll give you one quick example. Some colleagues at Columbia just published the first paper with an indigenous community in the Arctic. It was co-published. It was co-production of research. It was co-production of the design of research on sea ice behavior and seal hunting. And these climate scientists would not have been involved in that if Moore Foundation hadn't offered a grant. And the grant wasn't for an outcome. It was to build a relationship between an indigenous community and researchers, and it's working.
Yeah, I just want to jump, so interesting. Right. I just want to jump over to Maria, because I know you've been working with these sort of complex processes of co-production of knowledge and negotiations, etc. Do you have any comments to what Andrew said?
Just that what Andrew says, I mean, that's really important. And I think you had some good examples there that are important to put forward, on co-production, and actually also related to what Kalle said before on multiple evidence base. Do you hear me, Fredrik, or is it sort of?
Yeah.
More or less?
It's okay. It's okay.
No, but we have some good examples of this kind of co-production and to work with the multiple evidence base, with respect for different knowledge systems and so on. I think Stockholm Resilience Centers with Bio have a few examples that would be worth, maybe if Ambio could actually have a review of these kind of different processes, that would be interesting as well, including the ones Andrew just mentioned now. And then another important process is, of course, the whole IPBES process, the Intergovernmental Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, where they work with diverse knowledge systems. And actually the IPBES global assessment have now influenced the global biodiversity framework being negotiated right now, that will be decided upon under the Convention on Biodiversity at COP15. But I think that Ambio's role here, I mean, it's of course then to sort of nourish this kind of co-production, multiple evidence-based approaches and processes. And then another thing that has come up already is access. When I worked in Zambia, many of the colleagues and friends, researchers, you don't have access to publications. You can't afford to download them. And then of course you miss out a lot of potential important people who can read the research. So, and it's actually the same for me now at SIDA. I'm not, I mean, it costs to download the articles. So then I have to ask friends at the university to help me out with some articles. But so access is an important issue as well.
Seems like it's good if Jacco or Mariana could comment both on sort of the role that Ambio could take and the access, of course. Any comments?
Yeah, obviously that's an important issue, and that's probably the most key issue for our company is indeed to see the transition from subscription-based journals to open access, and that is that's not an easy task to do per se, if you want to do that in a sustainable way. But I think we're making good progress with that, and we're definitely listening to all the concerns that are coming from the community, thinking of Plan S and other movements that want us, that also voice strongly towards open access, open science. And that's what all our initiatives and investments are geared towards too.
Just to say that Ambio in the past years had published more and more articles on open access, no? So 3 years ago, we were publishing 30% of the articles on open access. Last year, 50% of our articles in Ambio were already open access. No, so we are definitely pushing and trying to see how much can we do, how far can we go with open access publications, and everything that we are doing in the industry at Springer is going to support Ambio in this path or in this way to put more and more information available to everyone.
Andrew, I think you had a comment. I didn't see the full in the chat, but would you like to develop or comment?
Oh, just that one key question here related to what Karen was talking about in this conversation as well, is what needs to happen in academia structurally and in funding to facilitate early career scientists even pursuing the community-based research or interdisciplinary research, which takes more time. They don't have the incentives, at least in the United States. Maybe in Europe, there's lots of different culture there, but until academia finds ways to break some of the old path-dependent structures, there won't be capacity to do the work to publish in these journals. And the links are in the chat.
Jeffrey, you had a comment as well.
Yeah, just sort of a personal comment. I published an article in Ambio a few months ago on nature and COVID-19, and it has been incredibly successful. And I get about 5 a day of journals writing to me saying how much they loved it. And boy, would they like me to publish in their journal. Well, you know, I'm retired. I don't have an income. I can't afford to publish somewhere else. You know, so and I love open access. I take full advantage of it, but I can't afford to contribute my articles as much as I used to. I don't have a secretary either. But you know, so there's the downside of it, is that people like me, you know, I get invited all the time, and so I have to tell all of these journals, you know, which are nice prestigious journals, they want me to write, and then I write to them. I say, oh, are you gonna subsidize that? No. So you know, it really does have it's a double-edged sword. I love it, except when it's cutting me when I can't publish, or I don't actually want to publish in those journals. But the Ambio really reached all the most written in terms of other journals writing to me at least 5 a day. So thank you, Ambio.
Yeah, thanks. It's a good birthday gift as well. Some thank you from Jeffrey. Thanks. I mean, we will, of course, we're short of time again. I would love to continue forever. But one thing that we were talking about earlier on was sort of the access to information today, and with the sort of era of fake news and post-truth and all that. What do you see the role of scientists and scientific publishers today in that context? Extremely briefly, and maybe start with Mariana or Jaco, if you see a new special role in that context, and I guess you do.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I think we're building very much on the brand as we have. We're Springer Nature. Springer has been around for, what is it, 175 years. Nature, 150 years. So we assume that brand mark on the paper already gives us the benefit of the doubt, if you want, in terms of publishing quality material. People know that what we publish tends to be peer-reviewed. Peer review system is not perfect, but it's the best that we have at the moment. And I think that together makes that people trust us, that what they see published under our umbrella, and that applies also to the other respected academic publishers out there, trustworthy.
Just to complete Jaco, it's not just about the articles that we publish and the journals that we publish, the articles that we publish at Ambio, but we have been working with hubs of communication, hubs of information, where we have blogs when you have social media accounts, where you have other kind of pieces of information that other people can see and that the other people, not just the academic community, can use, right? So building on our brand can also help make sure that at least this information is was reviewed, was validated, and can be useful. So that's one thing that we are trying to do as well.
I mean, this is so interesting because, of course, it's great if we have open access, but not everybody can read these peer-reviewed articles in a very sensible way. And Andrew, you've been working in that sort of field in between the scientists and the rest of the world. Do you have any general tips for Ambio and the researchers how to bridge that and get that conversation going? Oh, you're muted now.
Clearly, one of the paths is social media, and it involves training. When I started at Columbia 2 years ago, I'm building an initiative on communication and sustainability, and we want scientists who feel like it to be communicative in the public sphere. But there's actually techniques and lessons and warning signs, and you can get terribly abused, especially women and people of color tend to get slammed on social media by trolls and the like. And there's ways to deal with this stuff. So training, investment, and capacity building is part of this. I do think universities, journals, entities like the WMO, IUCN, we all underinvest in those back-end capacities. And then when the pandemic hit, I think WMO has like 6 people worldwide who monitor social media. And think about that in the context of the disinformation flood around the pandemic. You realize how underinvested we are in the capacities to be, and also it has to be adaptive because these systems are all changing. And so I think investing, really thinking about a journal, the back end of a journal or the back end of a university or the back end of the IPCC is a fundamental structure, not just some tacked on thing. The IPCC still relies on external partners, not all of them are quality partners, to get its message out, and that has led to problems in the past. So that's what I'd say.
I love working in the field of science communication myself. I love when you say we need more resources.
More funding, right?
So we will soon need to wrap up. I will ask you to give sort of a final comment or give a take-home message for the upcoming group discussion. But we have one short comment from Jeffrey before that.
It really is a question, because I believe in peer review, because I have to. That's one of the things I do for Ambio. I would like to know, how can we improve that system? How can we make peer review work more effectively? That's a question that I have.
I think that's a good question for the breakout group discussions, and maybe for some of the Ambio editors-in-chief and associate editor-in-chief to respond to afterwards. I'd love to hear that. Okay, so there will be a group discussion directly after this, and this group discussion will discuss exactly this: how to make Ambio research relevant for policy and practice and make it even more relevant for policy and practice. So now I would just like to all in the panel to send one take-home message, like 1 or 2 sentences to this group discussion. What is really important for them to bear in mind when discussing this? And we will start in the same order as the opening statements. So Maria Schultz, please.
Well, I think it could be two different roles. One is horizon scanning, to be publishing, like, this article Kalle showed from, you can't probably see it here, from 92 on indigenous knowledge and for biodiversity conservation. But, that was early on at that time. And articles on Anthropocene and so on, it's horizon scanning. It's early science that actually it influences how policy and practice later on operates. The other thing is to understand the dynamics of policy and practice. For example, now restoration with the new restoration law, like, for example, WWF, when I worked there, we worked with restoration projects, river restoration, how to understand how they work. We would have loved to work with scientists. They do that as well, though. But to understand, the dynamics of the system, of the social ecological system with these river restorations, what species comes, what is the best way of doing this, etc. That's another kind of relevance, to actually understand where the windows of opportunities are to influence. So it's dual.
Thank you, Maria. So we need to try to keep this short. Jeffrey, please, the take-home message for the upcoming group discussion.
Okay. Just a couple of real quick ones. One is I think we should have hybrid vigor among our authors so that we get biologists to work together with social scientists to co-author pieces so that we get more than one perspective from more than one direction. So hybrid vigor synthesis, bringing these social and biological together, I think is something that would be a real interesting line to try to push. That's okay. One.
Good.
And then just another way
short one, Jeffrey, please.
Yeah, another way of just adding to that is human health. That's got biology, but it also has biodiversity. It has different perspectives to it. But health is something that really gets people's interest. But let's build on that interest to bring in the other perspectives that Ambio might be able to put on the table.
Okay, bringing in some more health aspects. Interesting. Mariana, please.
I think that how to better support these communities and these different communities and needs of information and how to better communicate with them and how to make them involved to the process is definitely one of the takeovers. So we see that Ambio is already doing a lot of those things. We see different actions, but how can we improve it? How can we build on top of what we are doing? And how can we be even more active on helping transforming knowledge into action?
Good, thanks. Jaco, please.
Maybe my keyword then is translation. How do you translate where the scientific work in the journal and how to translate that to the other actors that are relevant for the journal for the solutions that you're trying to investigate, and move away from the purely academic paper, but maybe also ask the authors, or even when writing the article, like, hey, how does this translate to the physical problem that we're trying to resolve here?
Thanks. So Andrew, your comments?
Well, I'll go back to the fundamental meaning of the word communicate, which commune means it's a two-way conversation. It's not just sending information out, but making sure there's interconnectivity. And the one thing I didn't mention earlier, when I was at National Geographic Society, I was really eager to focus on the education interface. So teacher knows how to plug in when there's a special issue coming on, some new aspect of invasive species. There's a huge community of teachers who are eager to intersect, but how do you build those interfaces, facilitate the communication capacity with these sectors that can make a difference? And that means, I'm not just talking about colleges, I'm talking about right down through to secondary, primary education.
All right, thanks. We actually need to wrap up now. Jeffrey, if you have one extremely short snippet, I will allow it, please.
Okay, let's ask
final comment on this panel, please.
Okay, here it is. Let's ask the authors who are writing these scientific papers, what story are you trying to tell? What are you going to tell your children? What's the story that's coming out of your paper? And I would love to see people writing, what is the story that they're trying to tell? Because the scientific papers seldom actually are telling a story the way the story is told. And that's the way people have been communicating for thousands of years, telling stories. Let's hear them.
And Andrew keeps reminding us of the great hashtag, I am a scientist because. That's something I'm also interested in. Why do you do the science you do? What drives you? That's always an interesting question. Thanks, Andrew.
That's what connects.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Jaco. Thanks, everybody, for the panel. Again, would love to go on forever and would love to have you all here in the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, the beautiful Bayer Hall, but thank you.
Okay.
All right. Now we will have these breakout group discussions again. And for those of you who are not registered participants, you will have a break and you can come back for the closing remarks in 20 minutes at 10 minutes to 5. But for the others, you know what to do. You have gotten a PDF with all the links for the breakout group discussions. Use that and good luck. It's an important task to think about how Ambio can become even more relevant for policy and practice. Good luck. We will be back again 10 minutes to 5 for some closing remarks. Bye for now. Welcome back, everybody, to the Ambio 50 Years Conference. I hope you had really fruitful discussions in the breakout groups, and you who only follow us on the live stream, I hope you had coffee and that you have enjoyed the day. Now we only have one thing left, or actually 4 things left. There's 4 concluding remarks, some concluding words. It's going to be first, the Associate Editor-in-Chief Erik Andersson, and it's going to be Mariana Biofone from Springer. It's going to be Sverker Sörlin again. And then finally, of course, the Editor-in-Chief, Bo Söderström, will say goodbye and thanks and many other things as well. So let's go for the concluding remarks. Erik Andersson, Associate Professor at the Stockholm Resilience Center as well. Please.
Thank you, Fredrik. Well, you heard already early today, Sverker said, well, we've seen 50 years of development. Ambio and the field we're trying to study. Ambio has changed over these 50 years and we are continuing to change. So this has been the conference and the conversations we've had, the smaller group discussions, the information we've collected and what we've heard from you. It is all feeding into our ongoing work with making sure that Ambio stays relevant, that we continue to evolve and continue to contribute to the discussion about how to deal with major societal, environmental challenges. So thank you all for your input. We will not have time to summarize the discussions or everything we've heard from you in the conference, but for those of you who have been more involved, you can still access the different Jamboards and other things we've used just to look at what people have said, some of the insights, some of the comments. They'll be open for at least another week. And then you can also continue to add thoughts and comments. So we very much appreciate all your contributions, and it is feeding into Ambio and will help us make sure that Ambio stays relevant. So thanks. And with that, I leave the word to Mariana. What will you take with you back to Springer?
Thank you, Eric. I think that it was a really nice morning, a lot of discussions, really good points. And we bring back to Springer that we need to work together with a lot of communities. And we needed to think on how can Ambio be even more effective, even more important or active in the field, and how can we work with communication, and how can you make the information that we are publishing active, all those different players and actors that we are dealing today, that we are working with, or that we would like to work in the near future. So we're definitely going to discuss all those points and a lot of communication and new topics, and how can we be involved with Springer and Ambio to make Ambio go in the next 50 years and even more, right? So thank you so much. It was really nice being here. It was really nice to be part of the discussion. And I think that the word now is with Sverker.
Yes, I really fully agree with what has been said about the excitement, actually. I found in being part of this, and I think it's a privilege for an editorial team to have such a great conference to feed into the discussions that they should now continue. I just a couple of, I've already had a chance to say a few things about the journal and its past and its future, but I will pick up on the conversations that have been in the afternoon and say just a couple of things. I think Andrew Redkin made an important remark about the ongoing transformation towards conversation. And basically, I agree. And I certainly agree with the fact that social science and humanities and this kind of research is lagging behind in terms of the funding. But that is nothing that I think the Ambio editorial board can do much about. But when it comes to the conversation, there is one thing to remember though, and I think that is, it's obvious, but it needs to be said, and namely that journals are also the outlets for the scientific community. Scholars and scientists really want to publish their results. And part of that is being both precise and accurate, and also being part of a game of competition that is pretty thoroughly defined, and a kind of social practice that is to some extent quite extreme as well. So in this transformation to conversation mode and other modes, artistic and so on and so forth, that are all very attractive and interesting and probably also necessary, there's a tension built into this. And then it's easy, I think, to say, we have said it for a long time, all of those of us who are advocates of interdisciplinarity, that the academic structures should be changed. They should be different. The career paths should be building on other foundations and so on and so forth. But that is much, much easier said than done. And journals must remain also that kind of arena where the competition can be in a reasonable and fair way played out. Journals take different positions there. Already now, I think Ambio takes a position which is a little bit unusual. And the journal could probably be even more unusual in that regard, but there is a certain limit to that. And I think finding that balance is going to be very interesting indeed. And my other remark is about what Karen, in particular, Karen O'Brien, articulated about reaching out to sort of speak people at large and using various methods to do that, artistic and conversational and communicative and affective and so on. That also clashes, I think, or I shouldn't say clash perhaps, but there's a certain, again, a kind of interesting tension with how you judge the contributions. And I've been a little bit part of developing a way of trying to judge film as not just artistic performance, but also as actually a way of communicating research results. And that is quite demanding. But we have actually started now a platform called Annals for Crosscuts. Crosscuts is a little film festival with a sort of a scholarly background. And Annals for Crosscuts is actually a journal built upon that platform. And that has been an experimental arena. And maybe the word experiment is interesting. I think she also used that quite a bit, to be experimental in the evolution, but also think about the evolution. Evolution is often a bit slower. And so to combine experimentation and slow evolution here, I think is very, very useful indeed. And lots of opportunities. And it's actually great fun to be part of thinking about developing a journal like this with such an, now also such an impact. That also helps. So thank you.
Hello, and thank you so much for a wonderful afternoon. It's my task to say thank you to all of you who have seen this on Zoom or on YouTube. Also, this is the very first conference in this Biosphere, so I want to thank you. Many thanks to the tech personnel, Niklas, Peter, and Jonas. Thank you. And of course, the wonderful facilitator, Fredrik, who moderated this afternoon in an excellent way. All the editors, associate editors, and above all, Erik Andersson, who was mainly responsible for the contents of this afternoon. Already tomorrow morning, we will continue the discussions with an associate editors meeting here in Stockholm. And we are planning to have an advisory board meeting later on in Zoom later on in the autumn. If you have any kind of suggestions, just email me, my bo.soderstrom@kva.se. You will find me on the website. That's it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.